Diana Dooley, Secretary, Health and Human Services.
John Laird.
Brian Annis for Secretary Brian Kelly.
Gail Goldberg, public member.
Bob Fisher, public member.
Ken Alex, Director of Office of Planning and Research.
Matt Rodriguez.
Alexis Podesta with the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency.
And Manuel Pastor, public member as well.
Okay, and so I'm supposed to say the webcast is live? Okay, so I need a script apparently. The webcast is live. Let me just announce publicly what we did in closed session. We have reviewed the legacy of our interim director and have decided to make him the permanent director. So congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, so moving right along, do I hear a motion on item number 4, the approval of minutes from the last meeting? Was motion, any second? All in opposed? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have approved the minutes. Item number 5, any updates from council members? Okay, seeing none. All right. So no updates. I will note there was a Paris meeting. California was quite active in it, and a lot of the issues that we discuss here with the Strategic Growth Council around development and cities and states and communities were quite a significant subject, which is quite refreshing, and obviously the outcome of the Paris meeting was also quite refreshing. So with that, let me turn to Randall and the Executive Director's report.
While the presentation is coming up, let me just begin by saying it's an honor to serve, and thank you all for your trust, and I'm looking forward to working with you all moving ahead. So thank you. Good afternoon. Let me just say, first off, that I'll touch upon a few informational items in this report, but in the interest of time, you can find the other informational items in your folder, and happy to answer any questions about those should you have them. So a brief update, maybe quickly, on our activities since our communications activities, since our October meeting. In addition to the workshops for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, as well as the Sustainable Agricultural Lands and Conservation Program, we also participated in the second round of ARB's draft investment plan workshops, just as we did this past summer. And at a high level, I'll just say that not unlike other greenhouse gas reduction fund programs, HSC and SALC continue to be iterative and adaptive with regard to our guidelines, and we know that we have more to do. Well, I don't think that we can be all things to all people. I think a positive recognition that we receive through many of the public comments is acknowledgement of SGC's commitment to a transparent process that's participatory, insofar as engagement with stakeholders. And we certainly anticipate continuing this and working with ARB and other agencies to strengthen engagement across other programs. So with that, I'll just touch upon 4 areas here pretty briefly. New hires that we have on board, I think, which I mentioned at the last meeting, outreach, and then two programs or initiatives that we've been working on, integrated regional conservation and development, as well as the 5-year infrastructure plan. Now, mention this at our last meeting here, but I want to announce 3 new individuals who've joined the SGC team. First, Monica Palmieri, if you can just wave for us here, our Sustainable Communities Outreach Coordinator, who's going to be focused on AHSC program outreach, and which we'll speak about in a bit more here in a moment. Stacy Farfan, if she can wave her hand as well, if she's somewhere in here. She may be outside, hard at work. Program guidelines and support, and really guideline development for both AHSC and SALC, and is going to be helping us strengthen the connection between those two programs, and also working closely with Monica here on our outreach and technical assistance. And finally, Emily Tibbett, our advisor for environmental science and policy. And Emily really builds upon our partnership with High Speed Rail and works closely with Denny to support our work on integrated regional conservation and development, again, which I'll speak about more in a bit. So outreach, and I'll try to be quick because I know that we're going to be talking about our technical assistance pilot program here a little bit later. But I want to reiterate that we recognize the need to better prepare our communities to maximize GHG reductions and other co-benefits, and particularly in disadvantaged communities. I know we have a small amount of funds for the pilot, and we still need to evaluate what success looks like. But reflecting some of the comments from council that were heard at the last meeting and in the interim since the previous meeting, I think I can speak for all of the key staff here and my agency colleagues in saying that we're committed to doing so and strengthening the program. It's also part of really a broader effort. So in addition to ongoing workshops and consultations with local applicants, MPOs, and housing and transportation groups, Cal EPA and ARB will be coordinating outreach across all of the state's climate investments, and there will be positions similar to Monica's at each administering agency. And speaking from the standpoint of SGC, our intention here is to build upon our regional and local partnerships to educate and inform about our climate programs, how communities can better access resources, and develop best practices and other tools. So really, we're aiming to strengthen the nexus between our technical assistance pilot and the work that we know that's needed to better prepare our communities to advance our climate goals. So quickly, a couple of updates here on some of our initiatives. Integrated regional conservation and development. We're approaching the implementation phase here and wanted to take a moment to share what's next. You'll recall that this program aims to increase the effectiveness of regional development and natural resource conservation throughout the state. We've got a framework and methodology being developed by a multi-agency working group. It includes the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Conservation, Caltrans, Department of Water Resources, of course, SGC, and many others. This group is identifying conservation goals for California's ecoregions, and they've completed a review of past and current plans, and they're currently determining additional work that's needed. And finally, as I mentioned, we're moving to the stage of demonstration, actually being able to show what it is we can do. And we're advancing these demonstration pilots across 5 regions, the high-speed rail section from Bakersfield to Palmdale to Burbank, and the high-speed rail section across the central grasslands, from Merced to Gilroy, in the Sierra Nevada, in the San Joaquin Valley, and the San Francisco Bay region. I'll leave you here with this teaser of a slide, which we're near rolling out, and we anticipate being able to brief the council here in the future in a more focused presentation. This shows the state's ecoregions, with one of the ecoregions highlighted, and on the left-hand side there, filters for targets, our conservation goals, ecosystem services, opportunities and analyses, and threats. So very exciting, and more to hear about that in the year to come. The 5-year infrastructure plan, I wanted to give a quick update on this as we're nearing the finalization of the plan for this year. And this is just to remind the council, pursuant to the governor's executive order and SGC's role in working to incorporate our climate goals into state investment and planning. The 5-year infrastructure plan introduction, as well as agency statements, have been submitted to the Department of Finance, and we're working with the Department of Finance on refining that and finalizing language. In the coming year, we'll be coordinating with OPR and the Resources Agency to develop tools and guidance to integrate adaptation into state agencies. Again, this is pursuant to legislation that was discussed at our previous meeting, AB 1482 and SB 246, excuse me. And followed by this task, along with OPR, we're going to be aligning this effort with other state agency efforts, including sustainability roadmaps and other planning efforts in order to get at incorporating adaptation and our climate goals into the state's investment in training. I'll end with just one more specific note being undertaken by SGC staff. We're looking to incorporate location efficiency also as a part of state planning and investment. And this includes the effects of location on greenhouse gas emissions and commercial facility siting decisions. We recently hosted a workshop on this with the U.S. General Services Administration, and Suzanne Haig will be presenting on this at a future meeting with more details. So with that, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions.
Questions, comments? Well, let me say that the content of this, the substantive work that the staff is doing, key staff and SGC staff, it's very impressive to do in concert with the very extensive guideline review and update. So I want to thank and recognize all of the staff work as well as the key staff and your leadership on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let me note on item 6B, the legislative report. There's no legislative report update at this time. So, moving to the grant programs, item number 7, Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, the Fall 2015 funding round. Allison.
Hi. Good afternoon. Thanks very much. This item today is really to talk about award recommendations that staff is bringing forward to you for a notice of funding availability for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program that we released in fall of this year. You may remember that there were some challenges with year one implementation and the decision by this body to consider a second NOFA and release of funding using this current year's funding. The council authorized us as staff to release an additional funding round in October. And that funding round had approximately $30 million from the current year budget, so 15-16 funds. Of that, we really narrowed the eligibility of applicants. This was not a widespread public solicitation to all applicants, but really focused on those that applied in the first round in the spring, with an eligible list of 10 applicants. And those were applicants who were primarily affected by the jurisdictional cap that was in the current set of guidelines, not the potential adopted guidelines for later today. They would have had to have received scores greater than 60% and in the first round, but either did not receive funding or only received partial funding as a result of that jurisdictional cap. And that cap was a total of $15 million per local jurisdiction, a city or a county. So what we did this year is we had them actually, of those 10 applicants, we looked at how, if they were, one, still interested in being funded by our program, and if they had any requests or any additional funding since that time of submission of their application. And we actually allowed for them to, we did a very brief review of their request for funds, rescored them based on their reduction of GHGs per dollar, again, the bang for the buck. And if they had reduced their funding requests, that would have affected their score. We also looked at funds leveraged, which again, if you reduced your score, your funding request, you would have had a change in leverage. They're still subject to the current guidelines, which have the same conditions in place around requirements for disadvantaged communities, affordable housing, as well as that $15 million cap. Before you today, I'm bringing forward 8 projects for recommendation. We have a pretty broad range of projects, primarily in the transit-oriented development project area category, and looking at a total of $2.5 million, a little bit over the NOFA amount, but within a reasonable range. We're looking at projects that really do show significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions as well as need. Through that, the 8 projects that we received 8 projects out of the 10 that were eligible. They're all being recommended to be funded by this action. We had about 80% transit-oriented development projects versus a 20% integrated connectivity project. 78% of those projects benefit or are located in disadvantaged communities. And then there is one project that is affected by the jurisdictional cap. I'm going to flip back to that first slide. If you look at the First and Soto Transit-Oriented Development apartments, that one has a slightly reduced amount because of that jurisdictional cap. But what we've done is we funded 4 projects in LA, 2 in San Francisco, and 2 in the East Bay, South Bay. What we're actually asking for is the approval of staff recommendation. I'm happy to talk about any of the projects or some of the things that that might have happened and occurred in this funding round.
So let me, excuse me, remind everybody that if they have public comments they want to make, to fill out a form in the back and then hand that sheet to Mackenzie. For this item or for others, just indicate which item you want to speak on. So with that, any questions or comments for Allison? Manuel.
Very pleased that we're moving forward with this. Can you talk a little bit about the Jordan Downs project? In the last couple of days, I've gotten information about community concerns about the level of cleanup that's guaranteed as part of that project.
Yeah.
Since the council doesn't get into the specifics of each of these projects or the scoring of them, it would be good, however, given the fact that issues have been raised, to hear a little bit about what you've heard about those issues and what the response to those concerns is.
So Jordan Downs, as you can see, is a recommended project. It's their requested ask is $6.5 million. Jordan Downs is located in South Los Angeles, adjacent to the within close proximity to the the Blue Line, the Metro Blue Line. And what this is the first phase of a pretty large project. This the proposed phase actually looks at about we're looking at the existing project, the existing project that is currently there is about 700 units, the public housing project, and the full project at build out is 1,400 units, so it doubles the number of units. The concerns that you mentioned around environmental cleanup, there have been a number of concerns around adjacent properties as well as some properties purchased by the HACLA, the Housing Authority of the City of LA. And it's my understanding that they're working to address a lot of these issues, and that the Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTSC, is working actively with to remediate the site. That's, I think, at that point there are concerns about the adjacencies of the remediation to be done. But I believe that a lot of those issues are being addressed, and I think we as part of our application considered the fact that environmental mediation or that remediation would need to be addressed prior to construction and development.
I don't know whether Matt wants to address this at all, but I do think paying attention to that and the process is extraordinarily important. The community, many community members, some are obviously excited about the project, some are deeply concerned. Since one of DTSC's most recent experiences in Los Angeles involved the Exide plant and a very long problem with not cleaning up, and then finding a scale of problem that's much bigger than people thought. There are concerns that seem to be legitimate. I'm not fully informed, but there are concerns that, given that history, would seem to be legitimate, and I do hope we'll be taking a look at them as the project moves forward.
Two things come to mind. First off,
I know it's difficult when we've got a large number of grant applications before us to go through and describe the projects in any great detail. But for future reference, it would be helpful for us if we could have, just a summary of what these projects are and the details of the project. I've received a briefing on the projects that we've got here, but it'd be nice to have that information in the packet so that I would know there are 1,400 units involved. So when questions come in from the public, I've got some background that I can look at in the packet.
Absolutely.
Additionally, lead and lead contamination is just a pervasive problem throughout the LA basin. We're finding out more as we look into the Exide side about just lead issues throughout the LA area. We're committed to cleaning up these sites. As I've said before, from my perspective, DTSC and the effectiveness of DTSC's programs is critical to our whole goal of promoting sustainable communities here in California. If we can't provide assurance for people that these urbanized areas are safe to live in, and that we haven't either addressed the problems that are the legacy of past usage in these areas, or we're not adequately regulating the generators, hazardous waste generators that continue to exist in these areas, then we can't have successful sustainable communities programs. So it's our commitment to continue to work through and address the lead contamination issues in this area. I will say that there are sometimes questions about whether lead cleanup should be handed over to the U.S. EPA. I'll note that their standards for cleanup are much higher than the California standards. So we're committed to moving ahead and making sure that before anybody moves into these areas that they're safe and they meet our standards, California standards for residential use. Something we should keep an eye on. I wouldn't want the Strategic Growth Council to be, involved in the details on this, but I was aware of Jordan Downs before this meeting, and we're committed to making sure that it's a safe area for people to live in. I don't want to leave a problem for a future secretary to have to deal with in 10 years. So.
That's sort of unpolitical of you.
I will not claim to be a politician. So.
Okay, so maybe with that we should have a motion and then public comments.
I would like to move the staff recommendation, please.
Do we have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, wait, let's.
Sorry, point of
Sorry
order.
about that.
Oh.
We're going to withdraw that. The motion is on the floor, and now we'll have public comments. All right. I may still be on European time. Okay, so it looks like just a couple of commenters. Alicia Sebastian is first, and Evan Nimala is second. Okay, it was marked incorrectly, so, but I will, okay, go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you. Erin Niemela. I'm a consultant on contract with Bridge Housing, and just wanted to maybe further address the questions. Apparently, there is a voluntary agreement with DTSC, as the secretary alluded to. Remediation is underway, and it's actually expected to be completed in spring of 2016. And there is a full financial commitment by HACLA to pay for that cleanup. So just wanted to point out those points.
Thank you very much.
Available for any questions.
All right. Okay, so I didn't jump the gun by that much. So any further discussion of the motion?
Well, if I could ask the last speaker to come up. There's been a question about affordability for these units and particularly displacement for some of the existing residents. And under our guidelines, I think we do require that houses be of equal or greater affordability for the existing residents that are there. So I was just wondering how you've addressed that issue.
Appreciate that. Yes, actually, there is a one-to-one commitment for the 700 units that are actually being replaced. That's separate from the 700 additional units that are being built. That's all required in the master development agreement. The priority will be given to those residents on site. And all of the transfers that occur on site are anticipated to be done by June of 2016. So, guarantee in the master development agreement that those same units have to be provided at the same rent that they are provided at now to the same families with minimal disruption and prioritization for those families to get the first available housing on site to the degree that that they do need to be temporarily relocated.
Okay, so they will be at the same rent in addition to being offered the units?
Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
All right. Any other discussion? All right, I guess we foreshadowed this, but all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, staff recommendation is adopted. Okay, moving on to item number 8, the 2015-2016 Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program final draft guidelines. Who's Randall or who's doing it? Kate.
Kate White, Deputy Secretary at the State Transportation Agency. Good afternoon. I am going to kick it off here with just a little bit of context and then hand it over to my colleague, Susan Riggs, who is going to get into the differences between what you last saw, the guidelines you saw in October, and this version before you today. Very pleased to be here and be at this point of presenting our revised guidelines for this year. What has happened since October? The Strategic Growth Council has had 4 public workshops: Fresno, Sacramento, Oakland, Los Angeles, more than 240 participants at those workshops. We have received more than 100 comment letters, tracked all those, documented all those from a wide variety of stakeholders. We've had a series of stakeholder follow-up meetings, I would say probably dozens at this point since October, between all of us, key staff and SGC staff. And then the additional guidelines revisions is before you today based on those public comments. So a little background context for these changes. As you know, $400 million was in the budget for the SGC out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund for projects that reduce GHG emissions and vehicle miles traveled through land use, housing, transportation, and ag land preservation practices that support infill development. The Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program in particular is we were suggesting $320 million approximately be administered again this year by the Department of Housing and Community Development to increase accessibility of housing, employment centers, and key destinations through walking, biking, and transit. 3 project areas, project types. I don't believe this has changed since October. The TOD and the ICP areas, Trans-Oriented Development, Integrated Connectivity Project, you're familiar with those. We discussed in October, you discussed in October, the programmatic goal of 10% for a new category this year, the Rural Innovation Project areas. And so how did we get to the 320? That was my question on this job, so we put this slide in. So as I said, $400 million was budgeted. We are suggesting $40 million allocated to the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program, the SALC.
Just to be accurate on this, the budget is 20% of the total fund for the year. So 400 million is an estimate. We don't actually have the final number. We'll get to that. So I just want people to be aware of that soon.
So yeah, you can see there's a little rounded money note at the top on the right column because everything is kind of still estimated, as your chair mentioned. But these are round numbers. SALC, 40 million. The NOFA that you just approved for the 32 million. Then less the administrative costs, and that total available approximately for this year for this program, 320 million.
So one other comment, sorry, on the SALC, the Sustainable Agricultural Conservation Program, that the 40 million is actually a specific number that's in the guidelines, so that will not change based on the budget.
Okay, great. You know more than I do, so. And I'm going to hand it over to Susan to talk about some of the details of the differences between what you saw in October and today.
Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Susan Riggs. Currently suffering from schizophrenia. I think I'm the Deputy Secretary of Housing for BCSH today. So I'm going to take you through some of the highlights that you, just to reemphasize some of the bigger substantive changes that you heard in October, as well as some of the changes that we've made based upon the workshop since October to this final set of proposed guidelines. You're going to hear some themes, and I think what you're seeing in a lot of the revisions at this point are really responding to the needs to create a program that really addresses the diverse conditions throughout the state. And so, we're continuing to refine and try and address different geographies, different build out, densities, access to amenities, all of those things. And so those are really the primary themes that you'll be hearing. Do I have, I have the clipper. Oh, I'm waiting for somebody else to do it. Okay, so the first one is, as you recall, in October, we added a third development type, the Rural Innovation Project area. And since October, we have, in order to address kind of the inherent inequities in the geographic development kind of characteristics, we have, we're making a recommendation to separate out the scoring, the GHG metrics within each category of development type in order to make it more of an apples to apples comparison. And so once you take those three categories, we still have 20% left over. And so what we'll do is within that 20%, we're going to be have all three categories that haven't scored at the top, compete for the highest GHG ranking. We have taken a lot of time and effort to increase the clarity of definitions, especially those related to transportation and transit, just recognizing again that the type of transportation alternatives in communities is very diverse throughout the state. And so we've made a number of different clarifications to definitions there. In addition, we have increased the incentives for housing and transportation collaboration. Really this is an acknowledgement that, we're really forcing marriages through the program, and not all geographies are prepared to enter into formal collaboration. And so we've added some additional scoring categories that allow for informal collaboration and even really recognize where development sponsors or project sponsors are cross-leveraging other GGRF programs. Before we released the guidelines in round one, we spent a lot of time in the room with the metropolitan planning organizations and created a structure for where we could provide, where we could get their input on their priority projects. And we implemented that during the first round very successfully. I think that we had a good partnership throughout round one. And so what we're doing now is really formalizing that. Nothing substantive has changed. We've added some additional ways that we can collaborate and get feedback, and ways that the MPOs can really work to create the pipeline for the projects in their particular geographic area. But really, this is a formalization of the way that we had implemented the MPO participation in the first round. So location efficiency and access to destinations, this is a great example of where geographies really differ in terms of, how we can gauge the walkability or bikeability, access to amenities within the community. Certainly in urban communities, we've got, really built out databases like Walk Score and Bike Score that allow us to kind of have a proxy for understanding the walkability or bikeability of a community. That's not the case in all communities, and a lot of the integrated connectivity project areas as well as the rural innovation project areas, there isn't necessarily a walk score or bike score. So we've added some additional criteria in there to allow for applicants to demonstrate that there is access to amenities. Under anti-displacement strategies, we have changed the characteristics of this particular scored criteria to acknowledge that there's already in place a state requirement that requires, under the state relocation assistance law, requires residential and anti-displacement strategies. And so we've really made that a threshold criteria and now are focusing more on the workforce development and workforce training side of displacement in order to focus also on the economic displacement of businesses and the need for ensuring access to better paying jobs. You may recall in October, we brought to you a recommendation to increase the maximum award amounts across all categories to $20 million. Since then, we've also heard feedback that the minimums in the ICP and RIPA categories may be a little bit too high. And so we've reduced in that, or are recommending to reduce in those categories from $1 million to $500,000. I think you guys heard in October, the 4% tax credit, we're really hoping to encourage folks applying to this program that are providing affordable housing. We're trying to encourage them to go to the 4% low-income housing tax credit rather than 9% very oversubscribed low-income housing tax credit path. And so we are adding additional incentive here, going up to $60,000 a unit in subsidy in order to really facilitate the use of that program rather than the 9% low-income housing tax credit. And then a GHG quantification methodology. We have provided, really across the board, a lot of changes to, to increase transparency, clarity, really to reflect the goals of the program, to recognize, again, the diversity of geographies, all of those things. And I won't go into depth in those, but there's a variety of those outlined in the staff report, and ARB is here as well if you want to go into any detail on exactly what those are. Okay, so just very quickly, a couple highlights. The concept proposal filter has changed somewhat, and this is something that you heard about in October. The idea here being that in the first round, we really relied upon leverage and really having other funding sources lined up, and this created and actually penalized in some cases, smaller jurisdictions with less, fewer resources, as well as disadvantaging certain project types. And so rather than focusing on leverage at this point, we are going more towards an enforceable funding commitment, meaning that at the end of the day, even if you're 100% funded by this program, you're still competitive, and it's really about readiness, the financial readiness of the project so that we can get it moving very quickly. So that will be in the concept stage. That will be one of the filters, and then going into the full application scoring criteria. You heard in October that we've changed the dynamics in terms of where the GHG methodologies weigh in versus pulling out some of the policy priorities that we've spoken about at a number of council hearings, such as active transportation, depth of affordability, urban greening. Those types of things now have been pulled out and put into more scored policy objectives. And so the full application scoring will reflect that. Nothing has changed in terms of the process. Again, we'll go through concept proposal, We'll invite a group of high-ranking applications to submit a full application, and then ultimately we'll come back to this council for funding recommendations. And the timeline for that, if the council approves these guidelines today, we expect that we'll have a notice of funding availability out in January, and we'll be looking for concept applications in March of next year. And then we'll have a June 2016 full application deadline, and we'll anticipate bringing the recommendations back to you guys in August of next year. With that, we recommend the adoption of the draft final guidelines for the FY 2015-16 Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to go a little bit out of order. We'll get council comments and questions in a second, but we have a gentleman who has to catch a flight, and I want to make sure he has a chance to speak. So Supervisor John Benoit, if you can come up, we'll take your comments and then go back to the council questions.
Yeah, no, I didn't fly myself, Mr. Laird. I'm a lowly supervisor, I had to give up the airplane, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, members, friends. My name is John Benoit. I'm a Riverside County Supervisor. I have the privilege of service representing the 4th Supervisorial District, the eastern portion of Riverside County. But I'm here today to also speak as a member of several other boards on which I serve, specifically the South Coast Air Quality Management District Board, the Riverside County Transportation Commission, the Coachella Valley Association of Governments, the CSAC, California State Association of Counties, and it's fair to say that all these groups, as well as SCAG, which we are a member, share the concerns I'm about to express, many of which were provided in a written comment letter by many of those organizations. But let me start by thanking the Strategic Growth Council for undertaking a great deal of effort over the last several months to go out in the field and hear from people, listen to many views around California, and how best to improve this program. And I especially want to thank your now new Executive Director, Randall Winston, and your staff. I'm told you have been very effective in direct communications with Riverside County Transportation Commission, CVAG, and others. Your openness to communicating is refreshing and applauded and appreciated. I sincerely hope that dialogue will continue, because Riverside County is projected to soon become the 2nd most populous county in California, behind Los Angeles. And therefore, Riverside County is arguably one of the most impacted counties in the state when it comes to climate policies, and the most essential to meeting the state's future emission goals. We are committed to helping the state reach those goals. However, while the draft guidelines before you contain several important improvements, there are still components of the guidelines that continue to severely limit our region's ability to effectively compete. Significant issues remain that prevent Riverside County from being competitive when applying for integrated connectivity projects, as well as the transit-oriented development funds, which is 35% of the total funding. And this is despite the fact that Riverside and San Bernardino counties, the Inland Empires, have made important historic investments in our rail and bus networks, and many of our downtowns are undergoing revitalization. The guidelines also employ definitions of urban and suburban that disadvantage the Inland Empire, and eliminate consideration of one of the largest commuter rail systems in the country. We ask that the urban versus suburban definitions be determined based on existing densities within individual city jurisdictions, rather than defining us as part of a large metropolitan area. The way the communities are defined as written has also allowed small cities, where populations are less than 40,000 people, to compete for money set aside for the rural innovative projects areas. As it stands, communities in the eastern Coachella Valley, clearly disadvantaged rural environmental justice areas like Mecca, Thermal, and Oasis are still unlikely to be competitive in this process. These parts of my district, where there are significant numbers of migrant workers, must compete with communities that are much more urban in nature and therefore may have higher quality rail and bus service. Additional revisions to the guidelines are necessary if the Strategic Growth Council wants to ensure that rural areas of the state can effectively compete for this funding. I was interested in your previous presentation and noted of the list of projects, I didn't see one that was more than 20 miles from the coast. And there are reasons why those applications are either not being submitted or not being approved.
Just to be clear on that, those applications were in jurisdictions that hit a jurisdictional limit. The previous list of applications is very broad and covered every region of the state. So we can get you that information.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I was looking at that list and I asked if that's representative, and perhaps it was not quite. But if you look at it, I believe that there's a fair argument that Southern California, and particularly eastern regions and southern regions within Southern California, did not get a proportionate share of the previous allocations.
We've kind of responded in a fair amount of detail, and I'll ask Randall to follow up with you on it. But okay. There's a very specific set of responses to that.
All right, thank you, sir. But let me finish off by just saying housing densities is another issue. We would ask that they be measured on a number of persons per acre rather than the number of dwelling units per acre. The current definitions, again, unfairly ignore the demographics of the Inland Empire. Much of my district's population are working class families, often from the agricultural and hospitality industries. They were harder hit than most anybody else during the recession, and it's not unusual in our part of the world to have multiple families living together in single units or smaller units. There are large areas of my district that are not a region of studio apartments or trendy urban lofts. Much of our region consists of middle-class families who need more than ever an affordable place to live and have not been able to really access this in a fair, proportionate way. I sincerely hope you can incorporate and adopt these recommendations, which are necessary to allow large disadvantaged areas that I represent to more effectively compete in this process. And to that end, I would extend a personal invitation to all of you to come visit the Coachella Valley. I would love to personally show you the unique and deserving communities I represent that are being disadvantaged by this process. I want you to meet the stakeholders and residents who are trying to develop our region into one of the most dynamic places in California. We could use your help, and seeing really is believing. So thank you for your time and consideration. I hope to see you in our neck of the woods soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, let me return to the council and questions and comments for Susan. Gail, why don't you start?
Well, I learned a hard lesson last time that this is not the comment period, but the question period. So one of the challenges of round one was to really create the kind of collaboration and partnerships that we wanted to create between housing and transportation, you know, given the difference in the scheduling for both financing and implementation. Can you elaborate a bit on what changes have occurred for round two that will better encourage those kinds of partnerships that we are really looking to form?
So, so we've added some additional points that for collaboration that don't require formal joint applications. And so there's kind of a recognition that there may be geographic areas that, you know, there aren't existing formal opportunities, or maybe, you know, there's needs to be an evolution in order to create the type of formal partnerships that would be necessitated. And so we're trying to, you know, encourage steps in that direction without requiring formal obligations to submit joint applications. And, you know, this was something that, you know, I think you guys have heard about in terms of the joint and several liability. I mean, that's been, you know, somewhat of a barrier to creating the formal collaborations that we would like to see ultimately. We've also provided some additional points for high-speed rail station planning for those sites that are already environmentally cleared. You know, there's a recognition that, you know, these are places where we are already investing substantial sums of money, and we want to ensure that, you know, we're doing the right type of station planning and the right type of development adjacent to and proximate to those high-speed rail stations. Allison, you gonna? Yeah, I want you see if there's anything else that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we came out with the program last year, even, we recognized that there were challenges in what we might call an arranged marriage between housing and transportation, and that this is a long haul. And so what we've done in the second round and the second draft or second year of the guidelines is really tried to encourage that by providing the points and the incentives for those co-applicants and provide that kind of that finish line And recognizing that it will still take some time. Not every application will come in with that joint application, but we've provided for a number of ways for applications to still be competitive by proving and demonstrating the intention of partnerships down the line, leveraging of existing greenhouse gas reduction fund programs like the Transit Capital and Transit Operations Program, thinking about more than just that housing project or just that transportation project. The other thing that I think we've done a lot of now that we had a program to work from, especially this fall, is doing a lot of work with the transit agencies, transportation, public agencies, as well as other stakeholders to really make sure that they understand what their role can be in this program, as well as the housing community to make sure we better connect them. It's again one of those, it's a matchmaking exercise more than anything, and I think the facilitation of that will really help bring in some strong applications in the spring.
Other questions, Diana?
I think Manuel was ahead of me, Ken.
Manuel?
So I want to thank Gail for pointing out that lesson, so I will make sure to ask a question and then also make a comment in the form of a question. So the first, which is actually a question, I was quite pleased to see, well, first, y'all were very responsive both in the first round and the second round to comments that have been raised. And then, of course, some comments come in even later in the process. I did want to ask about, you talked about in the slide a secondary filter depending on where you scored within the disadvantaged community scoring. Where is that in the guidelines exactly? That's something I've been, and folks in Fresno, folks in less advantaged areas have been deeply concerned about.
So while they're looking for the specific reference, just to clarify, so what this is so if if there's a situation where there needs to be a tiebreaker where we have, a lot of projects that are competing to get to that full application round, one of the tiebreaker methodology would be for those projects that are in disadvantaged communities, those that rank the highest on the CalEnviro screen, and so those that are most disadvantaged by the ranking in CalEnviro screen.
Page 20.
Page 20.
So it's in the concept.
And would the degree of the tie-breaking depend on the degree of the difference? I mean, if something is ranked slightly lower, but it's much more disadvantaged?
So we're going strictly by how it's been categorized by CalEnviro screen, and so as I understand it, that each of the projects would fall within a certain percentage in accordance with CalEnviro screen, and so we would use it by that ranking.
So the one thing, of course, I've wanted to see all along is even more weight on that ranking. So I would encourage that as we move forward to thinking about guidelines in the future. Second, sort of real question, is the way in which BRT is dealt with, at least as it's written and I'm reading, is it sort of only counts if it's on a bus-only lane or HOV. I know in Los Angeles, one of our most important bus lines is the Vermont line, which is not fixed and probably never will be in the way that you're talking about, but it's hard to see it ever not being there, and so it's an important part of transit. You can imagine also in places like Fresno and other places where you're not going to get a dedicated bus line, you're not going to get a dedicated bus lane, but you may get a dedicated bus line. How are we thinking about those issues?
So I think, one of the things that we've emphasized, and obviously this is a balancing act, is the permanence of the infrastructure, because, we want to invest our these revenues in a way that we know that we have a commitment, a longer-term commitment to ensuring that there is the connectivity that is necessitated in order to reduce the vehicle miles traveled. And so, it's really, the permanence piece is a recognition that if there's a fixed lane or dedicated lane, that it's more likely than not that that we will continue to see those VMT reductions, versus if it is, something that due to, operational deficiencies or, political priorities may be eliminated in the future, we may not be able to realize the GHG reductions attached to the investment that we're making through this program in the future.
And the only point I'd make with that, and then Allison, you can fill in, is that I understand the need for the permanence because you want to make sure the investment's going to pay off. But I can't, for the life of me, ever conceive the Vermont Rapid Transit not being there, even though it'll never have a dedicated bus lane, just given the existing infrastructure. And so, again, sort of thinking forward, I wonder if there's another way to think about what permanence means, like if you've been highly committed and had it for a very long time, and it's probably going to survive for a very long time.
And yeah, I wanted to make sure, especially Chair, that we noted staff made a few clarifications on the guidelines, which does actually revisit the definition of high quality transit as well as bus rapid transit. The one challenge related to, one of the challenges related to some of these definitions, particularly with bus rapid transit, is that there's not a consistent definition. Yeah. And in bus rapid transit, so this is actually reflected in attachment 3, which I think Council has as an additional sheet, and if not, we can get you copies. There are, I think, copies provided in the back, which really clarifies the definition of both high-quality transit and bus rapid transit. And bus rapid transit includes basically characteristics which reflect express bus, which may not require the permanence of infrastructure as much as we had in the December 7th published guidelines. So we've looked at that, we've reflected on that. We know that that is a challenge, and we know that express bus is a way that many agencies and locals address their GHG reductions, and we want to make sure that that's considered, but also that it has that level of permanence that can guarantee those reductions over time.
And let me note, so that we're not casting aspersions on Fresno, that they approved quite an extensive amount of bus rapid transit this year. So. Diana.
I will always jump to the defense of Fresno. And I don't think I got the memo, Gail, about the difference between comments and questions. And so this is really
the idea is that we'll come back after public comment and have council comments so that we have the advantage of having heard the public comment.
Well, I still want to make a comment because I want
This is the iron fist rule that I...
but this is something, and I do this at Covered California all the time too, when I want to frame what I want to hear from the people who are going to comment to us. And what I reflect is that I think the staff has done a very good job with these revisions, and I'm reminded of my reaction when we went through the round 1 funding of this, of how focused we have to be on what the primary objective here is: reducing greenhouse gases and vehicle miles traveled. And it does remind me of the work in healthcare reform, because at Covered California, housing comes up there as well, and social determinants of health, and we are all interconnected, and we have had to stay very focused on how we get people covered and get their insurance, and then we deal with the nutrition, and then we deal with the housing, and we deal with the social determinants. And the housing is really important, but I just want to emphasize how important it is to me to try to stay focused on the fundamental mission of reducing greenhouse. That's what this work is. Housing is an extraordinary problem in California, and I hear it all the time in my area of health and human services, but it has to be connected to the source of this funding, which is greenhouse gases and vehicle miles traveled. So that is the comment that I wanted to frame what we're going to hear from the others.
You just want to ask her what she thinks it
I think it's an excellent question.
and since it's the speech I was going to give, you saved me the trouble, so perfect. Okay, other questions?
Thank you. One of the discussion points from last session or last council meeting was on flexibility across the 2 major categories of transit-oriented development and integrated connectivity projects. Secretary Kelly had brought up an example of a transit project in a Todd area that might connect a disadvantaged community with a major job center as something that might have that greenhouse gas reduction at a high level and be a significant contribution within the Todd community. There was also public comment about the ICP program, I believe from a low-income housing developer, suggesting that good transit, if you will, in a community that doesn't have great transit, a low-income housing project may still be very beneficial, have good greenhouse gas reductions. So the question is, while we have the emphasis in Todd on low-income housing as sort of at least an initial step in forming a project, in the ICP we have a transportation project as the first step in perhaps a broader project that might include housing. Should the council and the applicants see, for example, a transportation project as something that has a good chance of success in a Todd sense? Should a low-income housing developer in a ICP area, pursue that housing project? In other words, is the partnership feasible for a reasonable set of applicants, that is a reasonable expectation for applicants to move forward on?
To answer your question, I think it's a reasonable expectation given the goals of this program. It is not easy, and it's not as intuitive, given a transportation or a transit agency runs transit and transportation projects and housing likewise. But I think the way that we've structured the project area categories recognizes the need for housing and new housing in our transit-rich areas, as well as the need for improved transit services in those areas that may not have it, with the option of actually providing additional transportation or housing components if needed. And I think it is challenging. We are committed to working with agencies to help evolve and evolve their projects to think about more than just the immediate transportation improvement or the housing improvement. And so then, maybe I should clarify. I think it is a long-term approach. I think transportation projects are competitive with a housing component in a Todd project area. They're actually incredibly competitive given the right characteristics, but the components are still there.
Susan.
I would just add, part of this is just a recognition that, in some communities, the transit systems are very well built out, and some of them, they've got room to grow. So I think, we've provided an option, some flexibility there. Again, this is the acknowledgement that, we're working with very diverse geographies, very diverse, transportation systems. And so, we're trying to build in some flexibility to acknowledge that. Ultimately, the competitiveness is going to be based upon what's the package you put together. And so we're allowing some flexibility to acknowledge where, it's really, that the housing that the transportation is connecting to somewhere else, because a transportation system in isolation doesn't get you VMT reduction. It's only a transportation system that connects points, destinations that really get you the VMT reduction, and vice versa. If housing is built in isolation without transportation systems, you're not going to get the VMT reduction. So, so we're trying to build in the flexibility, acknowledging that there's going to be a range of, options given, where the particular project is being proposed.
Okay. Other questions? All right, so we have, why don't we do this again? Why don't we do a motion and then have public comment, and I'll do the public comment before we vote this time. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, so now let's have public comment. There are quite a lot of commenters. Let me ask people to keep it to 3 minutes or less. be pithy, and if somebody has made your comment previously, just say me too. So first commenter is Elisa Sebastian, followed by Tim Lynch.
Good afternoon. Alicia Sebastian with the California Coalition for Rural Housing. CCRH is also a member of the Rural Smart Growth Task Force. On behalf of our statewide membership, I would like to thank the council board and staff for your diligent work and your leadership in promoting investment in our rural communities. We are especially excited to see the continued support for the Rural Innovation Project area and its treatment as a true set-aside within AHSC. Additionally, we are pleased to see the rollout of the Technical Assistance Pilot Program. However, we are sorry not to see more significant changes made within the proposed final guidelines. We have submitted a letter with full comments, but I'd like to touch on a few points here. We are disappointed that the SGC is using the TCAC definition of rural as a 10% set-aside and not at a comparable 20% as it is in the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, as well as HCD's multifamily housing program. We urge SGC to bring the set-aside to 20% or consider an expanded small communities set-aside for localities not qualifying under the TCAC definition of rural, such as unincorporated fringe and legacy communities. We are also disheartened to see the definitive and unnecessary exclusion of tribal governments and tribal community development organizations excluded from round 2 of this AHSC funding. Although we have had the Rural Innovation Project area, there is still threshold and scoring barriers preventing access to these necessary resources. An example of a threshold barrier is how under the current density requirements, a rural community eligible under the RIPA but located within a metropolitan county would still be required to build at suburban densities. We recommend that if a community is rural under the Rural Innovation Project area, it should be allowed to build at these densities. And supporting what was previously said, these density requirements incentivize the construction of one-bedroom or studio individual units over multi-room larger family units that are more needed in rural development. As for barriers within scoring, although we are happy to see the expanded and redistributed points under the location, efficiency, and access to definitions, the use of bike score and walk score is exceedingly frustrating. It is exceedingly frustrating and it's inadequate and has invalid results in many communities throughout the state, but it's especially disadvantageous in rural communities. We know that the Rural Innovation Project area may fail before it has had a chance to succeed. If we continue to use inequitable tools like this, we will continue to see inequitable investments in the most vulnerable of California's communities. We understand that this is an ongoing process, and CCRH is here to offer our commitment as we overcome these obstacles together. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Lynch, followed by Janelle Fletcher.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lynch, and I'm here today on behalf of the Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County, and I'll be brief as Supervisor Benoit covered a lot of what we covered a lot of thoughts that we share, but we also share his appreciation for the hard work that staff has done and your willingness to meet with us on this issue. But specifically on the density issue, we're concerned that the Inland Empire and San Bernardino County will be excluded from consideration in our affordable housing projects because of the shared metropolitan statistical area with a population of over 4 million that we get lumped into. At the same time, San Bernardino, Riverside, the Inland Empire is parallel to what I think most definitions would call a suburban area. So the density requirements of 30 units or 30 dwelling units per acre or 30 dwelling units per acre as opposed to 20 are significant for us. And land values in San Bernardino County simply don't support the higher density dwelling unit definition. So we encourage you to re-examine that. We stand ready to work with you, and we appreciate the work that you've done thus far. Thank you.
Thank you. Janelle Fletcher, followed by Brian Yepes. Sure. Jeannie Ward-Waller's on deck.
Sorry, I'm a little sick, but
I feel your pain.
Thank you. But I did want to say, first and foremost, thank you so much to the staff and the council members for all the hard work on the affordable housing, sustainable communities program. And so I think we all here realize how complex and ambitious this program is. And we're just very grateful for the time and energy that you continue to pour into this program. And we're really focused on advancing walking and bicycling. We represent CATTLE, which is the Coalition for Active Transportation Leadership. There are around 12 organizations. And I want to say that we are impressed with a number of the changes in the guidelines, particularly the 10 supplemental points that for projects that include active transportation improvements, the creation of the Rural Innovation Project Area, and a number of others that we listed in our comment letter to staff and council. I think there are a couple of things that we kind of wanted to pinpoint today that we are excited to continue to work with the council and staff on to see either in the guidelines or the application to really move forward and encourage robust walking and bicycling. One of the ones that I will speak on is around workforce training and employment strategies. And this will also will come up again, I think, with the 535 Coalition. So we were very pleased to see that it made it in the guidelines as a strategy. One of the things that we were concerned about is that as it's currently framed with the anti-displacement piece, that it's going to dilute that. And so we're really pushing for and recommend that there's actually a separate category for the workforce training and employment strategies to really ensure that this provides a meaningful benefit. I think one of the other things that we really wanted to see with the Rural Innovation Project Area, again, we're very supportive of the creation and believe that it's going to help with rural communities, but we don't think that the language target is actually beneficial, and we think that creating a minimum floor to show that this is only a minimum investment and not a maximum will really show that this is a priority for the council to continue funding these areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeannie Ward-Waller, followed by Joshua Stark.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Jeannie Ward-Waller with the California Bicycle Coalition. I'm also with the Coalition for Active Transportation Leadership, so I want to identify my comments with Chanel's that she just made. And I'm also here representing the Sustainable Communities for All Coalition, and several other members of that coalition will speak on other points. I mostly want to share a positive response and thank the Council and really appreciate staff in particular for all the work they have put into this program. The extensive outreach they've done with our coalition and others has been really valuable. And we want to appreciate the really big step forward in this round of the guidelines in trying to better integrate the types of projects that are funded through this program, specifically things like urban greening and active transportation, prior planning that's been done. We really value those things in our coalitions and appreciate that being reflected in the guidelines. I want to make a specific point about active transportation, something that we're working with staff on and anticipate maybe seeing a little bit better reflected in the application and hopefully in future guidelines, is really valuing the quality of active transportation and more protected facilities are really becoming the standard for really getting mode shift. So we would like to work with the staff in helping to incentivize more protected biking and walking infrastructure as opposed to just straight striped bike lanes, which can be good in certain scenarios, but may not provide the level of protection in some of the transit priority areas and on other roads that we're looking for. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Joshua Stark, followed by James Pappas.
Good afternoon. Joshua Stark with Transform. Would like our comments aligned with the Sustainable Communities for All, and we're also a member of the Coalition for Active Transportation Leadership, and their comments as well. I'm here to speak briefly on geographic distribution. We appreciate the effort that staff has taken to make this program more geographically equitable. We fully support the new Rural Innovation Project Area category and the steps that the SGC has taken with the establishment of the 35% categories for TOD and ICP respectively, as well as a set aside for the RIPA program. We also appreciate that SGC has reserved the discretion to emphasize geographic distribution in its awards. And last, while these represent significant steps, we support further discussion and consideration next year around the geographic distribution model and developing around the nuances. Thank you.
Thank you. James Pappas, followed by Lisa Hershey.
Good afternoon. I'm James Pappas with California Housing Partnership. I I wanted to, of course, thank the council and council staff for all of the work that's gone into these guidelines and the responsiveness to the Sustainable Communities for All Coalition, as well as other groups represented here today. I wanted to address two things which specifically have to do with the way Strategic Growth Council will work with Air Resources Board and the tools that they'll be using to evaluate projects. As some of you may know, along with Transform, we supported a project by the Center for Neighborhood Technology on the interaction between income, location efficiency, and VMT. We want to thank Mike McCoy, who's helped facilitate a peer review process for that paper, and the paper has now been reposted on CNT's website with responses to peer review feedback. I wanted to just highlight that currently in the CaliMod tool, there's a very minimal amount of credit given to units serving low-income households, and we think that there's evidence within the paper that confirms what I think is a pretty intuitive fact for most people, that VMT for extremely low-income households, very low-income households, is significantly below median, and we think there are strides that could be made in seeing that included in the evaluation of projects. And this is important because the total GHG reduction and GHG reduction per dollar requested is an important factor in evaluation of projects, and subsidizing deep affordability costs. And so putting those things together and integrating them appropriately, we think needs to be furthered a little bit more in the evaluation process. Second point I'd like to make is on the place type caps that are included in the CalEMod tool. This affects whether a project is considered urban or suburban. And the effect of these caps, which are derived from research and are included in CalEMod to not overestimate or to more accurately estimate GHG reductions. However, they have some unintended consequences that run counter to the goals of the program. One is that because there are caps on projects, especially in more suburban or less urbanized areas, it essentially removes incentives for projects to take on more ambitious attempts at greenhouse gas reduction because they won't exceed the cap by doing more. And it also favors more urban projects over others, especially in areas where they may compete against each other, like the ICP. And so, we would suggest maybe an alternative approach, which would be using the place types, doing full point scoring for all of the different innovative strategies that projects are including to do the scoring. But for the estimation of the actual GHG reduction over the lifetime of the project, using the capped amount. And that would ensure that projects, the most competitive, most effective projects, are rising to the top. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Lisa Hershey, followed by Julie Snyder.
Hello, Council. Thank you for this opportunity to see you all again. Happy holidays. I'm going to follow up on all my colleagues before me from Sustainable Communities for All and our allies, and just note that we're really grateful to the SGC staff for listening to us around the anti-displacement in particular. We appreciate that the residential physical anti-displacement became threshold and that there was a focus on the economic displacement. We appreciate maintaining the 1 point for the small business related displacement as it is. And we encourage the other points to go towards economic displacement there, as was in the last draft version. So there was 3 points that would potentially go towards economic displacement because we recognize that people are more likely to be displaced currently by rising rents than physical demolition of buildings and rebuilding. So we think this is really important. Our concern is currently that we've taken the anti-displacement section and lumped in jobs with it, which is diluting the anti-displacement points because there were originally 4 for physical and economic anti-displacement, and now there's potentially less. And also applicants, if they propose to do jobs, which is very much an important part of this picture, they don't have to do anti-displacement. So our recommendation is that you keep 4 points for the anti-displacement section and move the jobs to another section. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Snyder, followed by Shion Flegel.
Hi, Mr. Chair and council members. I'm here today representing public advocates and the SB 535 Coalition. I think this may be the first coalition appearance before the council, so I just wanted to take a moment to tell you who we are. We are roughly 200 local, regional, and statewide groups who are dedicated to the effective implementation of the Senate Pro Tem's SB 535. And we have been working the last couple of years with agencies as well as the Air Resources Board to ensure that these investments bring meaningful benefits to both disadvantaged communities and households. AHSC is one of the coalition's 5 priority programs. Because, like other Californians, residents of these communities that are historically neglected and polluted want to live in vibrant places that have affordable homes and transportation. That's a shared goal. The first round of this program, we think, contributed greatly towards aspiring and reaching those goals. Similarly, a number of the pieces of the guidelines before you will continue to address these pressing needs, and my colleagues have mentioned some of those. The increase in points for housing affordability, as well as the inclusion of meaningful active transportation options, as well as the requirement for all projects to comply with state relocation law. And we were also very pleased that the final draft embraced our proposals around refining the anti-displacement section. But frankly, we were equally dismayed to see that the workforce training and employment points had been put into that same section. Creating quality jobs and avoiding displacement are the top 2 priorities in these investments for the 535 Coalition. We just had a statewide convening in October, and the coalition confirmed that those are the 2 most pressing concerns within each of these programs. And unfortunately, the proposed scoring structure basically pits them against each other in, frankly, a fairly low point category. There are a lot of categories ahead of this that have many more points assigned to them. This is only a 4-point category. We certainly recognize the balancing act that you and the staff face. The statute for this legislation mentions multiple goals, including reducing greenhouse gases, creating jobs, a whole range of things. But we think that pitting these 2 particular goals against each other is not the right approach, especially if you're attempting to serve lower income households and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's been recent ARB research, as well as the ARB funding guidelines that are in the middle of being finalized, that point out how avoiding displacement advances GHG reduction goals, because it allows people to stay in their homes, take advantage of expanded transit. Otherwise, they're forced to move into less expensive areas that, frankly, have fewer transportation options outside of cars. I expect the ARB guidelines will actually also require any project that wants to count toward the 535 minimum to avoid displacement.
But let me ask you to wrap up.
Okay, so I think the proposed approach undermines this. So we would support the creation of a separate category. You know, throughout the legislation, you often hear policymakers saying we want to create jobs. There's very few things that state can do in terms of affecting a national economy, but using state dollars to create quality training programs or to incentivize quality training and jobs actually is something you can do. It's a very, very direct impact. So we would urge you to do this on behalf of those for whom the economic recovery is really a dream. Thank you.
Thank you. Shion Flegel, followed by Jeff Riley.
Good afternoon. My name is Shioni Flegel. I work with Policy Link. I'm going to just echo what many of our partners have already said, so I'll be very brief. I want to start by thanking Randall, all of you, but Randall and Allison in particular. I think you both are setting a model for how public engagement processes should work for the state, and it's been a pleasure working with you, and we truly do appreciate, despite all of the feedback you're getting, we appreciate the way you've worked with us and the kind of dramatic changes that we've seen over the last year in this program. I'm going to speak just briefly to the workforce training piece. In addition to the coalitions that are here today, we convene a statewide coalition focused on improving outcomes for boys and men of color. Within that coalition, one of our members' focuses has been on figuring out how we really leverage statewide investments to drive better health outcomes to our communities while advancing economic opportunity. We think this program is a critical opportunity to do that. We were thrilled to see the inclusion of the focus on improving employment and workforce training opportunities for hard-to-employ individuals. We are concerned about it being combined with the anti-displacement language. We think that they are complementary strategies, but they're not the same strategies. So we are asking that as you adopt these guidelines, you consider pulling out the jobs piece to be scored in its own category, and would like to see 4 points both in that category and the anti-displacement one. And I'll pause there and let my colleagues continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Riley, followed by Rico Mastrodonato.
Good afternoon. Jeff Riley, Mercy Housing, California. Partially affiliated with CCRH and a number of other groups in the room. I just wanted to speak briefly to the density issue that was alluded to earlier with respect to RIPA. In the current regulations, there are lower densities, 15 dwelling units per acre, allowed for non-metropolitan counties. And beyond that, you have to meet a density requirement of 20 units per dwelling acre. I'd like to put a face to this, if I might, very briefly, in that there's a county, Yolo County, that most of you are familiar with. It's largely agricultural. A lot of unincorporated areas within that county, but it is not considered a non-metropolitan area or county. Consequently, the density requirements are 20 units per dwelling acre. There's a small community called Esparto within that county. It has a population of about 3,500. Build 20 units per acre in this community would be way outside of what it is that's being built there or has been built there, as well as the development costs for building in rural communities is quite high. So adding more units is once again very, very difficult. This particular project, however, would bring the benefit to the community of a clinic that's badly needed for farm workers in this particular area. And as a result of not being able to meet this particular density requirement, we will not be able to apply, at least in this round. And so I would certainly urge the council to hopefully consider that in their adoption of the current guidelines. And, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Rico Mastrodonato, followed by Krista Cassidy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. Rico Mastrodonato with the Trust for Public Land. I'm going to confine my comments to the urban greening point allocation within the water, energy, and greening scoring criteria. It's been very challenging to fund multi-benefit green infrastructure projects in the context of AHSC. And I really do want to underscore multi-benefit because it's projects like green alleys and local parks and greenways that not only have quantifiable energy efficiency and transportation benefits, but are the types of projects that are going to protect us against severe storm events and sea level rise. They capture stormwater. They offer health and environmental co-benefits. These projects also line up very well with the 535 requirement, the California Water Action Plan, Safeguarding California, among others. We think green infrastructure in the built environment should be an incredibly important component to the sustainable community model, and we continue to encourage SGC to score these project types higher within AHSC, but also to explore the possibility with the administration and the legislature to find other ways to fund these cross-cutting projects, including the consideration of a dedicated program to fund green infrastructure, perhaps even based on SGC and Resources Urban Greening Program of 2012 as a model. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Krista Cassidy, followed by Phoebe Seaton.
Good afternoon. I'm Krista Cassidy with the Nature Conservancy, and essentially we'll be echoing some of what you just heard from Rico, but just wanted to let the council know how supportive we are of the AHC program and commend you for the program's success so far. We do have concerns that we would like to see addressed in the guidelines before the next round of funding. We agree with the definition of green infrastructure as outlined in the program guidelines and acknowledge and thank you for adding more language around green infrastructure and a point to the scoring criteria in the new guidelines, incorporating green infrastructure into landscaping practices. This is a great start, but we still feel that we could do more to consider green infrastructure as a way to achieve GHG reductions in a meaningful way. So to that end, we would like to see the guidelines more heavily incentivize green infrastructure and the climate benefits accrued in the point system to provide more weight for GHG reductions and the associated public benefits. Thanks.
Thank you. Phoebe Seaton, followed by Carrie Timmer.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Phoebe Seaton from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Definitely echo the concern on displacement and workforce development. Echo concerns on that issue, and as well as the reliance on bike score and walk score, especially bike score, considering that it doesn't exist for a lot of the projects that will be participating and competing in the ICP program. I want to focus my comments, though, something that we've raised a few times through written correspondence is ensuring the inclusion of what are called fringe communities in the Rural Innovations Program area. We're concerned that with the current definition, those communities are not involved. And we see those communities are beyond city limits, but within spheres of influence, and really prime examples of where we should be focusing our infill development as a means to improve health and equity and economic development in those communities, increase interconnectivity between and among those communities and neighboring cities, and reduce the sprawl pressures that can lead to sprawl. We think that if we focus transportation and housing infill development in those areas, we will, again, kind of push back against the need to sprawl. If you look at sort of the example of how cities and communities have grown over the past century, we see that in many circumstances, the disadvantaged unincorporated communities are left uninvested in while cities grow to the north, to the east generally. And so we think that this program could really kind of set the standard for investing in those communities and prioritizing investing in those communities. And we think that that can happen best through the Rural Innovations Project. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Carrie Timmer, followed by Anya Lawler.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Carrie Timmer. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Sierra Business Council in Truckee. We did submit a more detailed letter to the council echoing prior comments, but I did want to highlight a couple of things this afternoon. First of all, we support many of the components of the guidelines, including the RIPA program and the separate binning process by project type, the technical assistance program, elimination of the jurisdictional cap, and other elements that have been described today. However, we were hoping that there would be more revisions made to the various scoring components to better address critical differences between urban and rural projects. Our biggest concern is that regardless of language recognizing the benefits of investing in rural regions, rural projects are still at a disadvantage. Various scoring mechanisms to keep rural communities from being able to participate outside of the RIPA set-aside. And when we asked for a dedicated set-aside amount for rural areas, we intended that to be a minimum as opposed to a cap. To generate widespread support over time, greenhouse gas reduction programs are going to need to provide benefit to all residents, as pointed out by the supervisor from the Inland Empire. We urge you not to adopt the final guidelines without first amending them to address a few of the remaining barriers to full and effective participation by rural and small communities. This should include, without going into detail because others have described it already, dealing differently with the bike score tool and allowing a narrative component instead, changing the greenhouse gas quantification methodology to allow more flexibility under the project settings, which will incentivize greater VMT reductions as expressed in detail by Mr. Pappas. Accounting for increased diversity of land uses around a project and not just within the project footprint itself. Removing the arbitrary 5,000 jobs per acre definition of central business district to better credit rural infill projects that locate close to job clusters and other attractions. Also modifying the DAC identification tool over time to better reflect disadvantaged rural communities, which currently don't show up at all in the DAC mapping. Creating a rural mechanism as an alternative to MPOs to better align state and regional goals and to create a pipeline for transportation efficient, affordable housing projects in rural regions. And finally, we do reiterate our request that others have made as well, that the RIPA dedicated amount be increased to 20% before you approve the final guidelines. As others have said, we certainly appreciate all the work that has gone into this program to date, and we do look forward to working with the council to ensure that this program can have the same transformational effect in rural regions as it is having in the urban regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anya Lawler, followed by Brian Yepes.
Good afternoon, Anya Lawler on behalf of Western Center on Law and Poverty. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments this afternoon on behalf of our low-income clients. First, I want to thank everyone who has worked tremendously hard to develop and refine this program over the last year and a half or so. It seems like it's been longer, but wow. It's a truly innovative program that's already playing a role in building more sustainable communities across California. And as someone who, like so many others in this room, has been working on these issues for a very long time, it's really exciting to see how far we've come and how much potential this program has to push us even further in terms of addressing climate change. We're largely very pleased with the guidelines and commend staff for their hard work. In particular, we're very grateful that preventing physical displacement is a threshold requirement and that the guidelines make totally clear that all grantees have to comply with state relocation assistance law. These are very important issues for our clients. We would still like to see the no net loss requirement applied not only to existing units affordable to, but also to those units occupied by lower income households. This is consistent with the way we do it under state density bonus law. And we hope that this can be considered in future rounds. And then we strongly echo the concern about the addition of workforce training and employment strategies to the economic displacement section. Preventing economic displacement is the critical issue for our clients right now. And unfortunately, with the addition of the jobs piece in the same section, applicants can potentially earn all three of those economic displacement points without actually doing anything to address economic displacement. We don't have anything against job creation. It's really important. But we're really hopeful that we can find a solution that allows those two sections to stand on their own. Displacement is already happening in TOD areas around the state, and it's really concerning for us. And so we're really hopeful that we can find a solution here at the 11th hour to make that a priority in these guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Yepes, followed by Jeff Roberts.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you so much for your time. I'll move this up a little here. My name is Brian Yepes. I am the chairman of Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority. We represent 7 member tribes in the 3-county area. First of all, we do want to thank you guys for your continued support and working with us. Mr. Winston has been very instrumental in reaching out to the tribes. We were very excited with the TCAC approval that we had for tribes and their definition to be able to qualify for that for a little bit of a set aside. That's something that we're really hoping to see happen possibly with this, the greenhouse gas reduction. There could be some carve out or some sort for tribes. We're very interested in working and continuing on a task force that we've talked about trying to establish and see if there's ways that we can work with the council as well as the tribes to kind of help offset some of those concerns. Many of the tribes right now currently live in areas that are specifically perfect or what I call the blueprint for sustainable communities. We don't really have a lot of transportation as it is. It's an issue for us. We have a lot of connected paths. People can live, work, play, go to school. We have medical facilities, gymnasiums, entertainment, all within our communities. And tribes with small land bases have trust land as well as fee land. And they have an opportunity to kind of grow and expand their services. This would be a great way to help tribes with affordable housing and assist them in their growth. Many of the tribes right now currently have opportunities and projects coming forward, whether it is incinerators, mini cogen systems, and these are things that are, some members do believe are detrimental to the community and health of our small communities. And as a result, there may be a way to provide incentives for tribes not to grow in these certain particular manners. The other thing would be maybe if there's a way to look at through TCAC, how tribes were included in that aspect. If we could also possibly be included in that with the Affordable Housing and Strategic Growth Council as we move forward with the greenhouse gas reduction and the cap and trade. It would be really nice if there was somewhat of a carve out for tribes to compete individually amongst themselves just to get started to see where that's out, because as it currently sits, we've been told, and we do understand and we appreciate again all the work that's been extended to the tribes through Northern Circle and Northern California and the state, but we really would like an opportunity to try to sit down and see how we could try to make that work, or what possibilities that we could do to continue to create some type of a joint venture or a partnership. And we do thank you very much. You have a couple other little things here I apologize, they came in a little bit late. I'm coming from 3 hours away. I'm known as the shorts guy, so. I apologize for my pausing here, but we do have a couple of projects, like I say, that could be related right now. And so one of the big things is we really do want to just reiterate the fact that we are willing to work with the council as well as all the departments in trying to establish this task force to see where something might be able to go. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, Jeff Roberts, followed by Holly Wonder-Stiles.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. I'm Jeff Roberts, speaking on behalf of Granville Homes in the city of Fresno. I have a very brief comment, but I want to acknowledge your staff as well for the guidance that they've given to our company in trying to hopefully file an application at some point in the near future. It's been mentioned here today regarding the BRT system that's proposed for Fresno. This is, we think, the best and highest type of transportation system that Fresno can do at this point in time. And we hope that you continue to acknowledge this type of system and rank it very high, as may be apparent in other communities as well. So we just want to acknowledge what's been said here today and echo that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Holly Wonder-Stiles.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Holly Wonder. I'm with Mutual Housing California. And there are two parts of the guidelines that I'd like to speak to today. And in each of those, I'd like to thank the council and the staff for changes that they have made, and just encourage you to continue to look at those areas and hopefully make further changes in the next round. The first is related to the greenhouse gas emissions. And as a residential developer, I'd like to remind all of us that it's the residential sector itself that generates 14% of the greenhouse gas emissions in California. So that in a program that is encouraging affordable housing development, it seems perfectly appropriate to look at reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of the residential development itself. And as a developer, we know that by building zero net energy housing, we can greatly reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of a residential community. And we'd like to see that. We know that in the scoring this time, there is proposed credit for that, but we'd like to see it equal footing with the VMT reductions in the scoring for the greenhouse gas emissions rather than a separate category. And the second concern that we have is related to the preference that the program is showing for tax credit developments that are developed with 4% credits as opposed to 9% credits. 9% credits have a substantially greater capacity to leverage private equity, and we'd like to make sure that the 9% credits projects are not disadvantaged. Given right now, though, that there seems to be a preference in the program for 4% credits over 9% credits, we were disappointed to see that the bump to the MHP housing limits was put up to only $60,000 per unit, when our analysis, and I think others in the state, have shown that it takes as much as $90,000 over the MHP limits to make a project financially feasible, especially in communities that have very few resources to support affordable housing development. So I thank you for the opportunity to give these comments.
Thank you very much. Okay, council members. We have a motion and we have heard public comments. What comments do folks on the council have, if any?
Well, I'd be interested in hearing whether the staff has any responses to any of the points that came up during the public comment period, or when they have any suggestions on how we might address some of the issues that were raised today. And a lot of people obviously think that's a good idea. So.
Yeah, thanks. We really appreciate the public comments today and the conversations that we've had over the last few months, years. And I think some very valid points came up. The one that I wanted to maybe address first, that we've been internally kind of discussing how we could address the economic and workforce category, the anti-displacement strategy category, in which the workforce training and employment strategies was amended. And I think what we'd like to propose to the council is I don't think it's a friendly amendment. It's friendly, but I don't think it's a friendly amendment in the way that we would do it in the legislature. But basically, keeping the points for the anti-displacement strategy component. I'm going to refer to page 44 and 45 in the final draft guidelines, and keeping the physical anti-displacement strategy component the same with 1 point available. Splitting out section 2, which looks at economic anti-displacement, and taking the workforce and training employment strategies out of that category and creating its own separate category. With that economic anti-displacement category would receive a maximum of 2 points for up to 3 strategies. And the workforce training and employment strategy section would look at kind of similar structure to point 1, which would be 1 point for more than 2 strategies, half a point for 1 strategy. It keeps the point totals the same, but recognizes that it's its own separate category. And I'm happy to draft something, send it around for just concurrence if that's something that's needed, but work through that. What it does is it doesn't involve a conversation about where we take points away from other categories outside of this particular structure in this category, but really does recognize the workforce training and employment section as something that we do want to continue to consider and encourage. I think in future years we can continue to think about how we can improve applications and maybe encourage those kind of practices as well even more. But that's kind of, I think, what staff has gone to. I'm looking at staff. We're generally okay with that, and I think we can amend that in that way, if that's all right. I think this is a really critical component of the goals of the program. It's one of the things that we should be considering more as an outcome as part of the co-benefits. And we didn't do a great job of making it clean in the guidelines, but we'd like to correct that.
If I could, the chair's indulgence, just a question about the community benefit and engagement. We're very specific in a lot of the things that we do in the guidelines, but it seemed like we were a little bit squishy on what's a community benefit. And so if you could describe that to me, and I'll just note that one of the things that I was thinking about is that the creation of jobs within the community seemed to me a community benefit. And I was just wondering about the overlap potentially between that community benefit and engagement. And I understand the engagement part of that, and the anti-displacement strategies. So.
Sure. I think the community benefit is, the community engagement is something that we've seen in a lot of programs. The community benefit component is really something in addition to. What we're looking for is meaningful community engagement so that that in the community outreach and engagement, you recognize and identify what those community needs might be. It might be workforce, jobs. It might be jobs. Just say that. It might be a range of other things. The need for better and safer access to schools, more affordable housing, et cetera. So that actually is a pretty broad category in which someone can, an application could identify a community benefit. So jobs could be considered within that. What I think we're looking at in the workforce training and employment are some more deliberate strategies that are in place to support that within that community. That's not necessarily a condition of the project. So we're looking at the difference between what the project has and the outreach done and the engagement done with the specific to the project has done, as opposed to the kinds of workplace and employment strategies that are in place in a broader sense. Does that make sense?
I'm thinking.
Okay.
Mr. Chair? I have a couple of questions, and the first one is really broad, and it's just that we have been through this process once. We learned from it, and the thing that's proposed to us now is a result of things that we learned. We had a lot of comments. Some were really big and significant, and you've addressed one. Some were really small. What's the context? Are we going to go through this process and try to fine-tune and address some of these things over time? Is there anything other than the item that you brought up that you think is important enough to address right now as we go into this? Because I think we had so many comments and we had no relative way to measure whether one was a typo and one was a significant thing. And so I'm just looking for you to identify whether you think there's something significant we should still address that came out of that, so that...
So I think the context is this is an evolving program. This is an iterative process. We learned a lot in the first year. We responded to a lot of comments and feedback and just a bit more space to think about the program and how these different parts interacted. And I think that's reflected in this year 2 set of guidelines. I think given that, I think we've worked really closely with the constituencies and with the stakeholders and with the concerns. I think that it deserves at least another year to run through what we've changed at this point. There are some things that people would like to see more of, see things strengthened, and I think we have an opportunity to do that in future rounds.
And then the second question, and this is specific about one of the comments, because I was trying to and could not glean the import of the tribal representatives' comments, and I was trying to understand how that fits in this process. And I know that within the resources agency, whether it's integrated regional watershed management or whether it was I had to negotiate with the tribes on marine protected areas, sometimes statutes don't represent things in ways that are helpful to us, which is true in integrated regional water. It just treats tribes as if they're just one stakeholder along with everything else, rather than recognizing the sovereign nation that exists and the status. And so when I heard the tribal representative, I was just trying to understand how that fit in this and whether there was something that we needed to address.
Yes, and that's a very good question. I think what you heard from Chairman Yepes, if you're still here, yeah. So a group of us, myself, along with representatives from Cal EPA and resources, as well as ARB, spent a day up in the Yucaipa area with sort of the seven tribes that Chairman Yepes mentioned. And so it was, I think, part of the comments, and I don't mean to speak to him too much, but I think was really couched within the broader context of the greenhouse gas reduction program. So AHSC and other programs as well, and how tribal communities and tribes can better access those programs. What we initiated that day was really the start, I think, of what will be a longer conversation. Currently, for reasons that maybe HCD can explain a bit more, tribal communities aren't able to access AHSC, and we are very committed, very much so committed to addressing that issue, as well as better access to all of the greenhouse gas reduction programs. And so what SGC intends to do, starting here in 2016, is become part of a task force. And again, I'll speak for SGC. I don't want to take too much words from CalEP and ARB, but I think that they'll join the effort as well to start to explore those issues and, again, how we can address issues of access.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the response.
Manuel?
So a couple of things. The first one's probably a question, really, which is with regard to the use of CalEMOD and some of the questions that have come up about now that the CNT study has undergone some peer review and some response to any modifications, because the language was a little bit squishy, probably in a good way, to take advantage of any evolutions of CalEMOD that might occur as we're moving into the next year. Where are we at with that? And then I've got a couple of things that I won't even try to ask as questions.
I'm not going to speak for ARB, and that's one of my lessons learned. But I actually, the results of the peer review are relatively new. I think we confirmed them and received the final revisions from the Center for Neighborhood Technology this week. So we haven't incorporates with the this year's GHG quantification methodology. We haven't determined that process yet, but we will be considering that. I think it is likely that ARB will issue a revised final based on a couple of pending things related to CalEMOD, the model update itself, and it's a bit of a timing question. We would like to consider the findings and make sure that it fits within the methodology the best possible.
So I'll urge you to consider the findings. And then I guess three other, oh yeah, okay, go.
Yeah, so Doug Ito with ARB. I just wanted to clarify on the CalEMOD project, CAPCOA, the Association of Air District, manage the model, and they're going through an update, a periodic update process. The squishy language in the guidelines simply indicates that if the working model for the next version is available for the competitive process, it would actually help streamline and make the application process easier for applicants. If the timing does not work out, then the guidelines do have all of the calculations and kind of a transparent way of identifying how the methodology works currently in the guidelines. So it's simply, if it's ready, then we'd love to be able to use it because it makes it a lot easier for everybody.
I actually appreciated the squishiness. So just a couple of other comments. First, I'm actually very sympathetic to the workforce development issues that have been raised and the way in which they're different than anti-displacement strategies. I mean, by way of trying to understand it, I assume that one of the reasons it got connected is because if you raise people's incomes, they also won't be displaced. But I do think those are two separate things. I'm not sure what's going to happen in this round, given the timing, which is something I'll come to in a second. But I do think that each of those categories actually deserves more points. And we might want to see, without reducing what's on the GHG side, if there's some other places where points can come from, if not in the next 10 minutes, sometime in the discussion that takes place over the next year, because these are evolving criteria. With that in mind, another thing I'd like to raise is a process issue about maybe trying to figure out both how we get out the drafts, and the staff has just done a great job, so many congratulations, with sufficient time for community actors to react so they can give us sufficient time to consider what they're thinking about before the day of the meeting. Because it's hard to think about what the trade-offs are from increasing the weight for workforce development, if you were to break them into two separate buckets and to expand the weighting, it's hard to think about the trade-offs without having a discussion with staff. So that may mean trying to get our materials out earlier than we did, and also asking community actors who know that for sure the public members are open to phone calls and meetings to make sure information gets to us so we can consider these things. Last sort of modest comment, which actually came my way and I think it makes some sense, is on the community engagement scoring. Certain communities, for example, when I live in Pasadena, which put a lot of energy into a general plan that people have agreed to, so that sometimes projects roll forward pretty cleanly, or the work that's been done in Fresno to create a general plan so that projects can move forward with perhaps less participation than you might expect because the participation was loaded up front. The way we're looking at things right now almost seems to give more weights to projects than to the hard work of the overall community plan that might help projects go through more quickly. And in fact, the point of a sustainable community strategy was to allow projects to be sort of streamlined. So I'd like us, particularly as we're scoring or thinking about that in the future, I mean, I could be reading all this wrong too, but to be thinking about that if you've done that really hard community outreach early and then projects roll through, that might be a good thing.
Okay, Gail.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting process to come here today and to look at all the recommendations and to hear the number of tweaks that folks are proposing. I do want to tell you that the consensus from everyone I've talked to, and trust me, lots of people call us and talk to us, but the consensus is that the staff has been enormously responsive to all of the questions and the issues that have been raised, and people are generally thrilled with the progress that we're making in what has turned out to be a very iterative process, that what's being proposed today is considerably better than what we had for round one. We've learned a lot and we've made changes. I'm sympathetic to many of the tweaks that I've heard both today and from community members, but I'm also a little bit divided today. As we sit here, it's a temptation sometimes to go, oh my God, what a great idea. Why didn't we think of that? Let's change that. But on the other hand, without a thoughtful discussion and without an opportunity for folks who might not agree with that but had no clue we were going to be talking about it today, we don't have an opportunity for that kind of a really thoughtful discussion. So I think that we have to be a little bit careful. I feel comfortable going forward with the recommendations that have been made today and that we've all considered, understanding that there are a number of things that I think many of us want to talk about. And I'm certainly sympathetic when I heard Manuel and others talk about the community engagement, to always give points for community engagement. There are times when it's not a good thing. When you already have an adopted plan that has been through a huge public input, and the entire point of that is to create by right projects. For you to go out and do an extensive outreach on a by right project is not only foolish, it's destructive. You know, don't ask people what they want if those decisions have already been made. So, you know, I do think there are a number of things that I would like to talk to staff about for round 3, but I am satisfied that what you have come forward with today are really good recommendations, and I'm comfortable going forward with all of them.
Matt?
Just to follow up on that, I do want to emphasize that I see this as an ongoing process. We learned from round one that led to many of the changes that you see here. We'll continue to take a look at rural projects as they come along. We want to see how the Rural Innovation Project Areas program works. And I would emphasize that rural projects can compete in that area. They can also compete in the other areas of the grant program. And so it's not like we're confining rural projects to just that 10% set aside. And we'll continue to work with this as time goes on. I think hearing from the other members of the council and hearing from the staff, there are a couple of issues that we could take a look at in the long term. The only issue that I thought we might want to consider here, and I think Professor Pastor referred to it, is do we want to try and work on that jobs workforce anti-displacement strategy? Do we want to split those out? Is there another point or two that we might borrow somewhere from in this list? I don't feel that we necessarily have to, that maybe that is something that we put on something that we move forward and look at in round three, but I think it is something that we need to give some consideration to. I'd be interested in thoughts of other members of the council, but on the whole, I do really want to congratulate the staff and everybody who's been involved in this process. I think we've made a lot of progress. There's been a lot of improvement, and I think that we are committed to continuing to work with this and work with the program as time goes on.
Okay, I have a couple of quick comments. First, I think the public comments and the letters as well were very focused on a much narrower set of issues than we've seen leading up to this. So that to me tells me that in general these are really quite good. I want to say about the comments that we did here, the rural set-aside, a favorite topic, density, particularly rural versus urban, but also in the Inland Empire being lumped with Southern California, which, we do need to look at that. And a couple of others. I come back to the very substantial difficulty posed by the AHSC program in general to hit every part of the state, transportation and housing, rural and urban. It's an impossible task. And I think the fact that we've gotten narrowed down to this set of comments, which I think, as we all acknowledge, we're going to continue to work on and work through, is fairly spectacular, actually. So I will join in congratulating staff, acknowledging the comments and the areas that we will continue to work on. But I will join my colleagues in saying let's accept where we are now and work over the next year. I don't know. Let me ask counsel of the council. If we have a motion. We could do an amendment related to the proposal of staff. We could act on the motion and then take up the issue of a further amendment. Any thoughts or suggestions from council members? Okay.
I want to better understand the amendment. What is the amendment that is being proposed?
Why don't we have Allison state it?
So this is in regard to the anti-displacement strategy scoring criteria component. What we would do is essentially in the section that talks about economic anti-displacement and workforce training employment strategies, basically uncouple that and have a separate category for economic anti-displacement with a maximum of 2 points for identification and implementation of up to 3 strategies. And then a separate, I think even a standalone to the comments that we've heard today, a separate scoring criteria for workforce and training employment strategies, not the same.
let me try to state it, which would be that that we would segregate the anti-displacement category. We would remove jobs and have that worth 1 point, and the remaining 2 points would stay in the anti-displacement strategy.
For a total of 3 points for anti-displacement, 1 for workforce strategies.
Got it.
And was this something, I like kind of the staff's reaction to this proposal? Was this
In some
something
ways,
that
it
you
was
considered it, or?
This is the consideration of the workforce training and employment strategies is something that staff has considered. We, I think, believe that it's in the wrong place. It's in the wrong criteria, and we want to separate it out. And in order to do that, we are comfortable with how we've distributed the points to reflect that we're not pulling from additional outside categories and opening that up.
So this is something that you think is good? You didn't think of it yourselves, but you think, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but
I think we
sort of to Gail's point about whether this is complete and how many other people would have commented on it if we'd had a chance, and do we limit it? I'm not unsympathetic to it, but I'm trying to respect the process that we've used and the public's participation in what came before us.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think that this is an option that can reflect the categories as distinct, and the scoring criteria as distinct. The question is the level of comfort that you as a body have with the points, as the allocation of the points. And I think that is something that could be up for discussion and could require some additional comment. Pastor.
Well, I guess one discomfort, but I'll start with a question. On the additional community benefits that are on page 43, workforce development is not a part of that?
But it is.
I mean, it's not called out.
It isn't specifically called out. It could be considered as such. There are a lot of additional community benefits that could be used and not necessarily workforce development.
So like Matt, I'm kind of sympathetic to adding more points to both these two things. I think the challenge is trying to figure out where that point comes from without a group here that thought they were about to lose a point, right? Being able to provide some guidance about their shared understanding that this is a desirable thing to do. But certainly it's something that as we move forward into the next, I mean, if anybody had a great idea, it'd be nice to hear it. But it's certainly something that I would be pushing for as we move forward, that not just separation, but more points.
But
Ken, I think I'm the maker of the motion.
Yes.
So I am more comfortable going forward. I think if we thought about it, there might be other minor tweaks here or there. This is very much better than our first round. We're going to be in this for a long time. As the maker of the motion, I would like to call the question on the original motion.
Okay, we'll call the question on the original motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the staff recommendation is adopted. Okay, any further comment before we move to the next item? Okay, great. Thank you. Item number 9. 2015 to 2016 Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program, Final Draft Guidelines. Julie.
Good afternoon. Julie Alvis, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency. I'm here to talk about item 9, the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program. Today, we are asking the Council to adopt the final draft guidelines for fiscal year 2015-16 of the SALC program. And with Council approval of the guidelines, we will begin solicitation of projects via a competitive process with plans to award up to $40 million in greenhouse gas reduction funds. Reminder, although everyone should be familiar with the purpose of the program, which is to avoid increases in greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with converting agricultural lands to more intensive GHG uses, urban and rural residential development. And we saw a slide earlier in the day today which described how SALC fits in within the greater Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. We're all part of one large program with SALC covering the agricultural land preservation practices which we are statutorily required to protect. So to update you on where we've been and what we've done since the October Strategic Growth Council meeting, we've held 3 public workshops in Tulare, Camarillo, and Santa Rosa, received written comments on the draft guidelines and a lot of public comments at those workshops, and then also just in additional stakeholder meetings that we've held. We've received written comments both on the draft guidelines and the draft quantification methodology, the greenhouse gas quantification methodology. Lots of follow-up meetings which resulted in the final guidelines that are before you today for approval. And with me is John Lowry, Assistant Director at Department of Conservation. He's going to walk through the proposed new revisions to the guidelines since last we were here in October.
Good afternoon. I'll try to roll through these as quickly as possible. Briefly to explain, there have been some significant changes to the guidelines as a result of the need to link the expenditures we were making for strategy development with measurable outcomes. And another very significant change has to do with developing a much more specific definition of what we would call at-risk lands. So we've gone to a lot of trouble and worked very closely with the Air Resources Board in an attempt to both quantify and quantify the relationship between risk and the need to protect lands for agricultural purposes. We've got 2 components of the program we're implementing again this year. Last year we called it planning and ag conservation easements. This year we're relabeling the first component of the program, agricultural strategies and outcomes. The strategy must lead to an outcome or be linked directly to an outcome in order to be eligible. We've increased the amount of the grant awards that we are going to make available for the agricultural strategies and outcome component of the program. Last year, as you recall, I think we had a $100,000 limit with a total of $1 million on the table. We're increasing the amount of the award to $250,000 this year with a 10% match, and then increasing the total amount of available for implementation of this component to about $2.5 million. The ag conservation easements, with the increase in funding that will be made available, the bulk of the expenditures will move towards that component of the program. We have made some changes that I'll go into a little bit in terms of the dollar amounts that we can make available for ag conservation easements, or the percentage that we make available under that program. So just very quickly, I'm not going to read these, but it gives you an idea of some of the new definitions that have been adopted that better define risk associated with agricultural land conversion, and therefore generate a greater necessity for investment in order to protect those lands to prevent unnecessary or premature conversion into non-agricultural uses. We have basically 9 options for demonstrating the risk of conversion. They're lumped into different categories, obviously, and depending on which category you find the option we will modify the methodology that we use to calculate the greenhouse gas emission benefits associated with that project. So again, increasing risk and then depending on the outcomes, we'll determine the methodology that we use to calculate greenhouse gas emission benefits. This is a really significant change from last year. Last year, we relied exclusively on the existing defined zoning as the method for establishing how many development rights would be extinguished, and therefore those would be the basis for the VMT calculations that we were making using CalEMOD. This year, we'll have several different methodologies that we can use to input, or variables that we can use to input into CalEMOD. Obviously, the information that we have has been posted and available. So let's talk specifically about strategy and outcome grants. What you see before you are, in essence, 5 outcomes that we've identified as being eligible for support through the strategy and outcome planning component of the program. Feel the need to read those specifically, but if you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them at this point in time or further down the road. Okay. And what we've done, and this was, as you recall last year, sort of a major point of contention. There was an extraordinary concern that investments of greenhouse gas dollars on planning-related activities may not result in specific greenhouse gas beneficial outcomes. We had quite a to-do about it. This year, I think we've, for better or for worse, we have tied things together in a very specific way to avoid the kinds of problems that people were concerned about last year. It's not an extraordinarily elegant solution to a problem, but I think it is a workable solution. So note that we have an administrative requirement for all strategies to delay the reimbursement of grant funds until some outcome is clearly demonstrated. And then we've gone further to define what outcomes would meet that qualification requirement. We have a couple of options. Option 1 is for an applicant to submit a joint application or a related application along with a new easement project within the county or a proposed greenbelt that would be tied to the strategy work that would be undertaken by the grantee. If both are successful and executed, we can reimburse both grantees on a routine routine basis, meaning pay as you go, rather than withholding the money until the outcome is actually generated. Option 2, that the applicant covers the cost of the strategy work until the first action or outcome is in place, at which time payment would be reimbursed. That could be any time from the completion of the strategy component of the program until many years in the future when we actually saw the first, say, conservation easement or other outcome generated. Okay. For the ag conservation easement component, some significant changes, although they're not widespread throughout the guidelines. Again, eligible entities that have a mission to permanently protect agricultural lands at risk of conversion to non-agricultural uses are eligible to receive grant funding and to apply for program benefits. We have not put a cap on the maximum award that we can provide. We do require a 25% match of the fair market value for ACEs not located in a disadvantaged community, or a match of 10%, meaning we can pay up to 90% of the cost for an ag conservation easement if that easement is located within a disadvantaged community as identified by Cal Enviro Screen version 2.0. Pre-proposals and full proposal process, a little bit different than the previous program where we will have certainly an opportunity for applicants to submit pre-proposals for both components of the program. We will not necessarily screen or dismiss or reject any of the project proposals at that point. We'll give technical assistance, guidance, advice. We may certainly encourage, we possibly might discourage people from submitting full applications at this point in time. But all that said, anyone eligible can submit an application during the full application period. Straightforward process from that point on. Once the applications are received, screened for eligibility and the threshold criteria, they'll be turned over to a technical review team that will review all the proposals, and then eventually from that process a set of funding recommendations will be made to you for consideration. Thank you.
So the timeline shows you what we've done, and so the next step really is today to get approval of the guidelines so that we can proceed with the solicitation process. We have a couple dates there, the pre-proposal summaries that John described. We'd ask that those be submitted by February 25th, complete applications due in mid-April, and then to come back before you in August with our second year award recommendations for your approval.
Questions from council members? John.
I just want to ask one quick question that's very similar to the one I asked on the last round, which is we went through 1 year with a smaller amount, and then we had lots of lessons learned, and then we had workshops to hear back from people, and then we worked very closely with ARB, constantly aware that this is related to greenhouse gas emissions. And so this is an iterative process where we really tried to take into account feedback, everything we learned, advice from the ARB, and in the hopes that this keeps going the way it's intended. We've done our best with these regulations, and then we will intend just to continue the iterative process so that we learn from how people are involved in this. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
Great, thank you.
Okay, other questions or comments? All right, why don't, let me see if there's a motion to be had on this. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second, so let's move to public comment with my usual admonition request for pithiness. Let's start with Carrie Timmer, followed by Krista Cassidy.
Morning. I guess I get to set the standard for pithiness. My name is Carrie Timmer, and actually I'm here on this item representing the Southern Sierra Partnership, which is an alliance of business and conservation organizations working to protect lands, livelihoods, and communities in the Southern Sierra. First of all, the partnership would like to convey its appreciation for the Ag Conservation Program in total, and especially its strong support for the proposed increase in funding for the SALC program to $40 million. As we all know what the benefits are, so I certainly won't repeat them, but we do appreciate that very specific decision. We do want to highlight two quick issues, though, for your consideration. First, the threshold criteria should be more inclusive. We recommend reconsideration of the new threshold criteria for the program. In the first year, SALC applicants had to make a compelling case that the easement projects they proposed would protect lands from development and reduce emissions. The new threshold criteria feel overly prescriptive and do not allow for regional variation. We strongly recommend a return to the first round narrative approach where applicants must make a compelling case for investment in their at-risk lands. If the council proceeds with the currently proposed threshold criteria, we do request that you change options 5 and 9 to 5 miles in order to address the risk of leapfrog development. The second point is that criteria for strategy and outcome grants should also be more inclusive. We do support the proposed increase in the upper limit to $250,000 and greatly appreciate the flexibility on advanced funding for certain categories of planning grants. However, with the new guidelines, we have moved away from local land use planning and policy development to protect farmland to instead a very prescriptive approach that may result in few actual policy changes, as local governments may find the program too onerous. We do understand the need to show that SALC-funded projects, will lead to greenhouse gas reductions, but respectfully request that the guidelines allow applicants to make the case for advanced funding for planning efforts that may not fit into one of the 5 existing categories. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Krista, followed by Jeannie Merrill.
Hi again. I'm Krista Cassidy with the Nature Conservancy. I meant to mention earlier in my comments from earlier today that the Nature Conservancy is a member of Sustainable Communities for All, Climate Plan, and the Natural and Working Lands Coalition. The Conservancy is pleased to support the SALC program and offer comments on the draft program guidelines. We would like to raise the following issues that we continue to be interested in and/or concerned about. The first issue is integration. We believe that in order to achieve GHG benefits in the most effective and coordinated way that delivers multiple benefits to communities, it is critically important that the SALC be integrated with strategies for the built environment. Long-term and even beyond the SALC, we need to work on fully integrating natural and working lands investments and strategies, and the built environment to fully achieve the benefits. This is consistent with the Governor's Executive Order, AB 32 and AB 1532, and we will look forward to working with the Council to achieve this vision. The second issue I'd like to raise is points for climate. The program guidelines currently award 0.5 points for projects which implement climate adaptation efforts, as reflected in a current regional or local planning document. We commend the Council for its attention to this strategy, but I think the guidelines would be strengthened if it increased it to 1 point and expanded to state multi-sector climate action plans instead of climate adaptation efforts. This will help encourage integration and multi-sector adaptation and mitigation. Now, the third issue I'd like to raise is funding. Not an issue, but just wanted to basically say there's clearly a demand for this program, and the good programs out there demonstrate that the funding needs to be increased. So we strongly support the staff's recommendation of $40 million to SALC in the second year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jeannie Merrill, followed by Virginia Jameson.
Thanks very much. Jeannie Merrill with the California Climate and Agriculture Network. We're a coalition of sustainable agriculture organizations, and we really appreciate the leadership of the council and staff who've made it climate-smart investments in agricultural land conservation possible today. We think the program is headed in a great direction, and we have a few comments on sort of what we think has been improved and areas for additional improvement. We support the staff's recommendation for expanded funding for the program. I think we've demonstrated in the first round that $5 million was a modest but critical start, but demand for the program far exceeded the $5 million, and we strongly support the staff's recommendation of $40 million for the second round. We also greatly appreciate the lowering of the match requirements, which will make it much easier to protect those at-risk agricultural lands where matching funds, particularly on the urban-suburban edge, can be harder to come by. There have been some significant changes in the program of this second round, including the addition of the threshold criteria. I want to align my comments with what Carrie said earlier. We think that the first round approach of providing a narrative where the applicant was required to describe how by protecting their particular parcel of land, that they were protecting land at risk of development was a better approach. There's lots of regional variability in California. And options 1 through 9 simply can't speak to all of those regional variations when it comes to sprawl or leapfrog development in California. But if the council proceeds with the threshold criteria, we strongly recommend changing options 5 and 9 from the current 2 miles, which we think is an arbitrary limit, to 5 miles. We think that'll better capture, particularly in sort of larger counties, sprawl and leapfrog development risks. Another important issue is how the program is framed. In the first round, SALC was described as a program that would garner greenhouse gas emission reductions by protecting agricultural lands, by reducing vehicle miles traveled, increasing or protecting carbon sequestration benefits of that agricultural land, as well as avoiding greenhouse gas emissions associated with that urban or suburban rural ranchette conversion. And the program goals have been narrowed in this second round to really only focus on reducing vehicle miles traveled. It doesn't describe the carbon sequestration benefits of agricultural land protection, nor does it describe the benefits of avoided greenhouse gas emissions associated with sprawl. We think that limited frame also then translates into limited quantification of the greenhouse gas emission reduction benefits. So we would encourage more enhanced quantification methodology for the program. We do appreciate the work that ARB has been doing to include upzoning in their model, but still we can do more to improve upon the modeling efforts to include carbon sequestration and avoided emissions. And finally,
let me ask you to wrap up, please.
Finally, on the strategy and outcome grants, we're also very concerned that we're moving away from a granting program that many local governments will even bother to apply, that it's way too narrowed and prescriptive, and we think an option to address that is to allow for a sixth option, which would allow the local government to describe how their planning effort would result in greenhouse gas emission reductions by protecting agricultural lands. Thanks.
Thank you. Virginia Jameson, followed by Nancy Schaefer.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm the Deputy State Director at American Farmland Trust for California. And I would also like to thank you for all the hard work you and staff have done. We feel like they've been really responsive to our comments, and we really appreciate that. We also really appreciate that there's a program to focus specifically on agricultural land. California currently spends much less money per capita than many other states to preserve ag land. I would echo the comments and completely concur with everything that Jeannie Merrill just said, except to add that perhaps instead of treating 2 or 5 mile limits as hard and fast indicators of development pressure, we could instead consider them conclusive presumptions. In other words, properties within those limits would automatically qualify, but properties farther away could still qualify if applicants can make the case that they're subject to significant development pressure. So, for example, a property close to a highway interchange might be at significant risk, even if it's more than 2 miles away from a sphere of influence or an existing developed area. On the strategies and outcomes grants, we are glad that the guidelines provide an option to enable upfront disbursement of some funding. We understand the reason for not putting up all the money before results are forthcoming. However, it's still likely that many cities and counties will not be willing to assume the risk that they will not succeed. So another option you might consider would be to consider this strategy and outcomes grant program as a whole as an investment pool that you expect to produce an overall greenhouse gas reduction benefit. So much as with a mutual fund, wherein the overall return is more important than the performance of each individual stock, the SALC program could invest in a wide range of programs with varying risk but still ensure an overall benefit. So, essentially we want to say that California is on the cutting edge of climate work. We should be pushing the envelope on this. If we're asking too much of these cities and counties, we run the risk that we won't accomplish anything. Just to quote CARB here in their 2014 scoping plan, recent research has shown that greenhouse gas emissions from urban areas are much greater than those from agricultural lands on a per acre basis. As California population increases, pressure to convert ag croplands and other rangelands to urban and suburban development also increase. Conservation of these lands will be important in meeting our long-term climate goals. So once again, American Farmland Trust appreciates your leadership and commitment on this critical issue, and we look forward to continuing to play a role in making SALC the best possible program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nancy Schaefer, followed by Robert Parkhurst.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Nancy Schaefer with the California Rangeland Trust, and I concur with what Jeannie Merrill said and try to keep this short. First thing I want to do, though, is commend the staff of the Department of Conservation and Resources Agency who've done a really good job of putting this program together and making an extraordinary effort to reach out to as many groups as possible. The funding is critical. It increased to $40 million is great, and the reduction of the match to 25%. The state of funding for ag land conservation in the state in California is abysmal. The Department of Conservation's California Farmland Conservation Program is out of money. The Wildlife Conservation Board's Rangeland Program is out of money. Natural Resources Conservation Service Agricultural Conservation Easement Program this year allocated a total of about $8.5 million to the entire state, and half of that is for sage grouse on the other side, eastern side of the mountains. So this funding is really critical. And that also leads into questions about requesting changes to the threshold criteria, as Jeannie has mentioned, because there is so little funding available. And as long as projects meet the goals of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, making as many projects eligible as possible seems really important. Another point I'd like to make is the inclusion of the threat of conversion of rangelands to cultivated agriculture being included as an eligible criteria for threat. The Rangeland Trust has about 400,000 acres on our waiting list, representing about 50 ranches. A number of those will fit within the existing threshold criteria, but many more would be eligible if rangeland conversion is considered an eligible at-risk project. One of the reasons we were told why rangeland conversion was not included is because there isn't a way to measure that. The Environmental Defense Fund has received a grant from the Natural Resources Conservation Service to come up with a methodology to measure greenhouse gas emissions avoided from rangeland conversion. And Robert Parkhurst with EDF is here to talk more about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Robert, followed by Juan Pablo Galvan.
Chairman Alex, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Robert Parkhurst. I am the Director of Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Markets at the Environmental Defense Fund. Our goal is to find solutions to maximize yields and productivity while minimizing greenhouse gas emissions. We appreciate the hard work by staff on the guidelines and support the staff's request of $40 million to protect ag lands throughout the state. I'm here to make two main comments today. First is we want to encourage the council to expand the lands covered under the Ag Sustainability Lands Conservation Program in the future to include rangelands. California rangelands currently sequester approximately 2.2 million metric tons per year. Second, and it's been noted by several people today, one of the challenges that ARB has faced is with respect to the quantification of the greenhouse gas potential for carbon sequestration of grasslands. This summer, EDF was part of a working group with the Climate Action Reserve, which developed about 1,000 emissions factors, which allow for the calculation of sequestration in soil based on the major land resource regions, soil type, and the land history. We'd be pleased to work with the council and with the Department of Conservation to include rangelands and the carbon sequestration potential on them in the future. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Juan Pablo Galvan, followed by Corey Bullis.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Pablo Galvan, and I'm the land use planner for Save Mount Diablo. We include more than 8,000 donors and supporters, many of which live in the Eastern Bay Area region. I'd just like to very, very briefly state our full agreement with the comments that other speakers today have made. Thank you very much to staff and the council for the responsiveness in terms of funding and match requirement levels. And we agree with the proposed changes made by other speakers to the threshold criteria and the expansiveness of the framing of the goals for the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Corey Bullis, followed by Lena Septimo.
Corey Bullis on behalf of Placer County, which is a member of the California Habitat Conservation Planning Coalition. The coalition is comprised of local agencies, conservation organizations, and businesses that support natural community conservation plans and habitat conservation plans and assist in their preparation and implementation. We have two recommendations for your consideration today as it relates to the SALC program going forward. First, we believe that the program should include open space and habitat lands. habitat lands protection in addition to agricultural lands. And second, we believe that the program should give grants for fee title land acquisition in addition to conservation easements. To the first point, conservation through open space and habitat lands helps limit urban sprawl and VMT intensive development. This is especially true in areas of the state where agricultural lands are lacking as an effective means to contain urban limit lines. To the second point, fee title acquisitions permanently preclude development or other uses that interfere with carbon sequestration. We're happy to note that the final draft of the 3-year cap and trade investment plan removes the focus of only using conservation easements, which we interpret as an opportunity to enable use of fee title-based acquisitions. We know including these recommendations will add cost pressures, which is why we are also actively engaged in seeking a doubling of cap and trade auction revenues allocation to SALT for the 16-17 budget year. Thank you.
Thank you. Lena Septimo.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lena Septimo, and I'm here representing the Land Trust of Napa County. We wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you for ag land conservation. We work in a county where agriculture is one of our key identities within the Napa Valley, and have, with this year's program, been very pleased with the collaboration and the communication that's been available to us with the Department of Conservation. We're actually hoping in the next 10 days that we're going to close the ag conservation easements for which we've received the funding for this program. So we're really excited about that. To that end, we do have a couple of comments. We echo a lot that's been said in terms of hooray for the increase in funding for the program. It's excessively important. Within the Napa County specifically, what we're seeing is a dramatic difference between the cost of land that's cultivated and then that's within rangeland prices. So for us to work actually with kind of as a criticism with the current GHG quantifications that are proposed, for us to focus more on that, it would push a lot of our effort towards the more expensive land within the Napa Valley, and that would make it impossible for us to do those types of purchase conservation easements or any type of work like that. So that being said, Napa County also has one of the most unique zoning ordinances within actually the entire country, with our dedicated ag preserve that already protects cultivated agriculture and then limits residential and urban sprawl from the existing municipalities. I'm going to piggyback on what California Rangeland Trust said in the Environmental Defense Fund with regards to considering with the GHG quantifications in addressing again the allowance of eliminating conversion to row crops or cultivates and a lot of and the carbon sequestration that happens both with rangeland and then also rangeland that has existing forest canopy. So there are numbers that exist for those types of forest sequestration calculations. And I guess that being said, we're looking forward to closing our projects, and we hope to be successful with the next range of them going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. John.
I have a brief question of, I guess Julie is the one, and it just follows up on my previous thing, because it's really hard when the comments come about individual pieces of the program when it was vetted extensively for the greenhouse gas reduction methodology. So if you change one piece of it, you might knock another one out of whack. And all this was presented with that and taking the lessons we learned and taking what we heard in workshops to put it in a complete package. And so is there anything, and I hate to put you on the spot this way, but is there anything you heard in the public comments that you think could be changed or should be changed now without just continuing the iterative process and seeing how it works as proposed this year and then looking at it at the end of the year?
I've got my devil on my shoulder saying, get in there and mix it up.
Well, you can also be monosyllabic if
Yeah.
that...
Well, I have a couple of comments to that. One, regarding the GHG quantification and what we are measuring. I think, that there's room going forward to look at, conversion of rangelands, other than the looking at extinguishment of development rights is our what we're measuring. That to do that now, we don't have that methodology, so we can't make a change like that. Same with including building energy use and the sequestration potential of the land itself. I think those are all things that we can look at measuring going forward. There were a few comments about the threshold criteria, in particular the option 5 and 9 regarding right now it says a 2-mile proximity. I think there's been a requested change to 5 miles. And I think that really stems because California has such, the geographic diversity of the state, and that 2 miles in one county looks a lot different than 2-mile proximity in another county. And so I think that there is concern that by being too prescriptive that we will be at a disadvantage because we won't be able to bring in properties that very much meet the objectives of this program just because of the strict mileage that we've put into the guidelines. So I don't know if that kind of edit from 2 to 5 miles could happen at this point without, I feel like I would need to consult with Air Resources Board to see if that impacts the quantification methodology.
But that's exactly what I was getting at. And the thing that I'm tempted to do as the maker of the motion is just say, I think we should go as is, but we should take very seriously the comments that were made in looking at whether that's a way to fine tune. And I think one of the toughest things about this is that we are looking at it in the context of greenhouse gas reductions, and people really want it to be a program to just make sure that we preserve ag land in a more independent context. And it is really hard to do that balancing. And the poor rangeland trust person walked into one of my major pet peeves that you've heard with me in meetings. And every time they say we're less per capita than other states, I always respond by saying, and name which of those other states have Prop 13. It just makes me crazy every time, as if we live in a vacuum in comparison. And so I think that the significant thing is that the council has been very gracious in the fact that the amount of money is moving up. It is really significant here, and we had trouble on one side in getting the money out the door in the first round, and we had to adjust with the match going down and the amounts going up and another thing to be able to make sure that we could make that happen. And if you were to look in the abstract and look away from greenhouse gas emissions, the real thing in California, the policy thing, is what's most at risk of conversion and how do we deal with it? And I think in the context of greenhouse gas reductions, we have gone at that and doing those lands that, as you said, one size doesn't fit all in the mileage, going for those lands that are the closest to the areas where there's urban conversion really makes that point. And so as hard as it is and as much as it would be good to pick at it and fine tune it, I think there's been a long iterative process leading up to this. We should approve it as recommended, but we should take seriously all the comments and look at this over this year to see if those are in fact impediments or issues, and know that we're going to be looking at it in terms of the greenhouse gas reductions, and some of them didn't fit that exactly, some of the comments, and it's really hard to cherry pick in response to that. So I'm willing, based on this, to just go ahead with the recommendation as is. I think it's great progress, and we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Oh, wow. I got so excited I broke my microphone. That's because I've been so quiet. Nobody's used to that. I concur with Secretary Laird, and I think it's important to move forward and to know that we will continue to make these adjustments. I do want to speak specifically to the strategies and outcomes grants because I am very sympathetic to some of the comments that were made. But I also have to remember that we need to meet the ARB criteria, which is not easy to do here. And that it may be that we've just got to try to find a way to bring that kind of integration together, and it may not be through a strategies grant at all. But I think we need to go forward with this. And before we say no one will bother to apply for these, I think we need to move forward with this and see what the outcome is of the second year of trying to do that. So I appreciate your comments, John, and I agree. I think it's time to move this forward.
Ken, if I might just say one thing. I guess it's two things. One is I want to thank John for both his comments and making sure he steered clear of controversy by raising Prop 13. And yeah, exactly. And second is I learned a lot through this discussion. Be having to leave in a few moments because of a family obligation, so I didn't want you to think it was in response to however this vote goes. So.
A couple of quick comments. The tension we have here is the law is quite clear that this is about GHG reductions, period. In the context of agricultural land preservation and reduction of emissions in that sector. It's not for preservation, that's not the primary purpose, although it's an important aspect of it. So we have to make sure, and it's absolutely central to this, that what we're doing is legally supportable. And that in that, ARB gets a lot of deference, and this is an ongoing dialogue, and as has been noted, we'll continue it. It's not about open space to the Placer County comment. Those are in different categories. This is an ag land preservation related GHG emission reduction strategy. And then on the sequestration issue, ag lands, range lands, et cetera, the Strategic Growth Council and a number of specific members up here are extremely interested in that set of issues. Composting, biochar, sequestration in soils, Healthy Soils Initiative that Secretary Ross is in charge of. We are going to be moving forward with a lot of that. And so this particular set of issues around sequestration is going to change in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. And so I expect this program will change along with it, and I look forward to that iteration. And then finally, as a general comment, I think it's clear that we really stress that working with staff with the multiple workshops and many comment periods and possibilities for interaction is the most essential way to influence the guidelines, because it's difficult up here to make changes unless you've convinced staff that it's important to do so. Okay. So with that, we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, the guideline is adopted. Okay, moving right along. We're on to item 10. The 2015-2016 Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Technical Assistance Pilot Program. And I see Allison.
Hi again. This is just an information item. In the interest of time, We wanted to get through this fairly quickly. This is an active RFP, so we want to provide some background on what we're doing so far and give you a quick update. What we received in this budget year was a one-time amount from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund of $500,000 to do a technical assistance pilot program for the AHSC. We wanted to, and the focus is to maximize funding of those projects in disadvantaged communities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In October, this council approved the approach to the technical assistance program, so I'm going to come back to you with a couple of details. First of all, again, the eligibility for the pilot is those first-year awardees, or sorry, those first-year applicants from disadvantaged communities who did not receive awards. We recognize that there are a lot of communities, a lot of applicants who need assistance, technical assistance, have these needs, and the intention of this particular pilot is to document and learn from it, be able to develop a stronger program to better assist those applicants in future years should this program continue to grow. We want to refine and expand what technical assistance actually means, and should additional funding be made available, we can develop a more robust program. So the contracts that are available are for technical assistance providers. So those would be any entity that would be able to provide grant writing assistance, application development and support, as well as partnership facilitation, and specifically to this program, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, expertise, calculations, things like that. So it's broadly available to public agencies, particularly regional agencies, local universities, community colleges, as well as for-profit consultants and nonprofit organizations. We structured this proposal so that the focus would be regional in nature, so that we would look at a body of a group of technical assistance providers to provide specific support to a region, say the San Joaquin Valley, Southern California, et cetera. And so that, but they can apply for more than one region. If they wanted to apply for statewide support, they could apply for all of the, for the entire group of regions. As I mentioned, we're looking at year 2 application support, both at the concept application as well as at the full application. This is, as we've seen in the first year, an interesting dynamic given the needs of those potential recipients. The first year we would note that we got a lot of applicants who, for the sake of just taking advantage of the available funding, submitted an application that wasn't fully baked, wasn't fully ready. And a lot of this first round, the second round, we will hopefully have expertise to help facilitate and develop better and stronger applications. The other point that I want to mention here is that we actually did add an additional component, additional task, which looks at how do we look at applicants who weren't even able to submit an application because they lacked the organizational capacity, the institutional capacity, and really the ability to develop a fully fleshed out award. We've asked those respondents to this RFP to provide as a task a proposal for capacity building, not less than 10%, so we're looking at overall no more than $50,000. But I think it's a good indication of what we would expect this program to be should additional funding be available, and acknowledge that there's a need for this kind of capacity building statewide. We are, as I mentioned, the timeline for this pilot is quick. We are currently under there's an open solicitation, and the due date of that is this Monday at noon. And we hope to have consultants selected and engaged by the time the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability, is released in January, in late January. This is going to be an interesting challenge, and I think we're up for it. But with that, we would work closely with the consultants to help identify and match to those respective applicants and work with them to better to ensure that those applications either receive the appropriate assistance, or if they're not ready for this year, being able to continue to support that application, but actually recognize those limitations. The goal is to be able to provide meaningful support and not necessarily get in as a metric. An application is not considered kind of the end goal this year if they're not ready. We would have essentially, this mirrors the timeframe for year 2, and then at the end of the consultant contract, we would have some time for some evaluation of the program and working with consultants to develop kind of some final recommendations on what that program might be. And with that, that's my update.
So I just want to note that this is in addition to Monica Palmieri's work doing outreach, and obviously there'll be some coordination.
This pilot program is a small piece of what the SGC and the AHSC program staff are doing. Monica, as our Sustainable Communities Outreach Liaison and Coordinator, is a component of that, helping to facilitate this throughout the state, outside of this pilot program, and then the work that staff do to do our regular consultations, facilitations, that is in addition to. So many of the communities who may feel aren't included in this pilot program are being addressed and assisted in other ways.
Okay, any questions or comments? All right, we have one public comment on this item. Phoebe Seaton, let's have that.
Since there's only one, do I still only get 3 minutes?
In fact, maybe 2.5.
Thanks so much, Phoebe Seaton, again, Leadership Council. I think many of you know that we were really hoping that, very excited about the technical assistance program and hoping that it would be expanded to capture more potential applicants. We were thinking especially those in some rural communities that weren't necessarily eligible to apply last time, but will have the capacity this time, but will need the extra support. Going forward, we're going to seek, I think, some more funding through the legislative processes this year for technical assistance. We look forward to working with you and staff to really building out this program and watching this program be a standard that others can follow, and look forward to, with working with your technical assistance folks. If money becomes available in the near future, we would really like to see the program expanded and would be pleased to talk to any of you about how we see that happening. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Moving along, item 11 is the 2015-2016 Transit and Intercity Rail and Capital Program and Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, and I see Brian Annis.
Good afternoon again, and it does feel good to stand up and move around a bit, so feel free to join me. I'll try to be brief on this. We're just going to cover 5 of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund programs that in some way benefit transit to help modernize, integrate, and grow ridership, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So let's see. So the agenda will cover the 2015 program outcomes for the 2 main programs, transit or low carbon transit operations program and transit intercity rail capital program. Talk about some of the changes to statute and guidelines since the last program, and then take any questions. There are, as I mentioned, 5 programs. The first 3 listed on the PowerPoint fall under a statutory umbrella of a program called Transit, Affordable Housing, and Sustainable Community Program. And that is within the Strategic Growth Council's purview to look at all 3 programs and advise on how we can better coordinate. Again, I mentioned the first 2 there. Of course, the third is the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, which received a lot of discussion today. 2 related GGRF programs, the Low Carbon Transportation Program that the Air Board runs for improving vehicle emissions, and lastly, the High Speed Rail Project. Common thread to articulate across all 5 programs is modernizing and integrating California's rail and transit systems to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase transit ridership. There's many strategies employed here. They include expanded transit service, faster service, integration among transit operators, improved active transportation to transit, and of course, cleaner emission transit vehicles. Funding for the 5 programs is outlined here. 4 of the 5 receive funding through the continuous budget appropriation. That's a share of greenhouse gas auction credits. The Transit Intercity Rail program receives 10% of auction proceeds, high-speed rail 25%, the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities 20%, and lastly, the Low Carbon Transit Operation Program 5%. Briefly looking back at 2015 for the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, funding level there was set at $25 million. Through a formula allocation, funds were awarded to 95 projects, and 68 of those projects benefited disadvantaged communities. Some examples of projects included operations funding to support new bus routes, more frequent bus service, and longer train sets. Also, free or discounted transit fares, improved stations and stops, and purchase of new transit vehicles, and also purchase of infrastructure to support zero-emission buses. The 2015 Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program was funded at a level that ended up being $224 million, which covered a couple years of program funding. Through a competitive process, funds were awarded to 14 projects, and 13 of the projects, of those 13 projects, benefited disadvantaged communities. Some specific projects awarded as examples, new or reconditioned light rail vehicles for San Francisco Muni and Sacramento Regional Transit, new Tier 4 locomotives for Metrolink, zero-emission buses for Antelope Valley Transit, integrated ticketing and passes for the Lausanne Amtrak corridor in Southern California. And how that worked was Amtrak coordinated with 12 transit agencies that shared transit stops with Amtrak, and customers with the Amtrak ticket could, without an additional fee, ride those connecting transit services. Last few, LA Metro Rosa Parks Station improvements and Blue Line improvements to better connect various transit operations there in a disadvantaged community, and then bus rapid transit projects in Stockton, Orange County, and San Diego. There was one
question. To what degree in that program did you take mattered to the Growth Council into account in the competitive? Obviously, a lot of things within the matter to the council.
Sure.
And I'm just curious, our work influenced.
Sure, I would certainly like to say yes from my perspective. The statutory provisions of the program do include a lot of cross-cutting issues to consider. Certainly greenhouse gas reduction, a component of all programs. We were also looking at consistency with sustainable community strategies at the regional level. We asked applicants if the project was coordinated with any low-income housing development around stations. So we certainly hope so, and we've tried to further that as we're looking to guidelines for next year. Again, wanted to highlight one project from 2015 that was jointly funded from the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program and the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, and that was the South Bay Bus Rapid Transit Project. That completed the final 11 miles of a new 21-mile higher speed bus rapid transit route that connected the border at Otay Mesa to downtown San Diego, with service as frequent as every 15 minutes. The council approved $7 million for that project, and we finished their request with $4 million from the competitive transit grant program. Looking ahead to 2016, the formulaic program for benefits really all transit operators across the state is increasing in amount to $75 million. With that fourth quarter auction, because of the uncertainty about how much auctions are going to bring in, and this is a formulaic program, so we're pushing that fourth quarter into the next fiscal year for administrative simplicity. But some changes there. Agencies will have an ability to accrue funds into the following year. Some of the transit operators are small and receive a relatively small funding amount, so they can build that up over 2 years. Working with the Air Board, there's a streamlined greenhouse gas reduction, a quantification process, again, recognizing some of the grants are small and we don't want to make the cost of applying exceed the grant level. And lastly, we have clarified some reporting requirements for that program. Clearly, this program, to coordinate with other GGRF programs, if there's, I think, an ability where one program adds a new piece of capital equipment, the operations program can help that operator fund the bus driver, fund the charging stations, things like that to make that service operate. Looking ahead for the competitive capital program, we're again looking at a 2-year program for the next round, which would be approximately $400 million of funding. That may be adjusted with the governor's budget, or ultimately we'll see what all the auctions bring in over the next few years. There has been a statutory change since last year for this program. Senate Bill 9 was signed recently by the governor, and it requires a transition to a 5-year program by 2018, and also requires what the law calls transformative capital investments, and does something that in transportation is called letters of no prejudice process. And what that means is if something is programmed for a grant in an out year and that recipient has other funding sources, they can advance the project to earlier years, advance the greenhouse gas benefit, use their local money first, and then when the auction revenues become available to the program, they can be reimbursed. We also, more explicitly in these guidelines now that are draft, encourage recipient or applicants to consider other GGRF funds and programs, as we did with that San Diego rapid bus project. An applicant could come in and cite a larger project that perhaps includes a housing program or housing component through Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities, and a transit component through the Transit Capital Program. And the way we try to coordinate the two here is ask the applicants that the projects be separable if perhaps one grant is approved, the other not. But in considering the application, we do see what they're trying to do in coordinating a larger program and a larger greenhouse gas. So I will end there, and happy to.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, Randall, are you doing the next 2 items, or that you did them in your report? So items 12 and 13 were included in the executive director's report, and so that brings us to item 15, in which we adjourn the meeting. So thank you very much.